Please have a seat. On behalf of the Peace Research Institute Oslo, PRIO, I'm very happy to welcome you to this seminar on drones in European skies. I don't have to emphasize the significance and relevance of this topic at these times. I could, from a research director perspective, emphasize the challenge of doing research on a topic which is so significant, so evolving, emerging, and changing, that throughout the 5 years that this project has been going on, a lot has happened in this field. So what type of research projects do you need to set up in order to address such a changing topic? If the project would have started out with an idea of the concrete solutions to how to regulate drones in civil airspace, it would have been outdated even as it began. So the way that this project combines basic research with very applied research, it combines very fundamental theories of the social, technological, and political conditions for drones with practical knowledge on how it is currently being addressed and how also legal institutions and lawyers are developing ideas as we speak in terms of how to grapple with this. So that combination of theory and practice, of basic and applied research, I think it makes it a model project for how to address such significant issues. It also includes close collaboration amongst academics and practitioner communities, as well as Norwegian and leading international academics, which we'll see throughout this day. It's been very skillfully led by Bruno Oliveira Martins, who will now introduce some findings from the project. But welcome everyone, and eventually some coffee has also arrived back here, so you'll find your moment to sneak out and get one. But Bruno, please, and congratulations with this project coming to a close.
Thanks so much. Okay, thanks, Christopher. It's obviously very good and very rewarding to have this event today. I'm very happy to see so many people in the room, but also so many people online. The event is being broadcasted and will then be recorded, so keep that in mind when you make your interventions, if that is of relevance to you. Indeed, it has been a big pleasure to lead this project. And we thought that perhaps a very good way of starting this event, which will be, as you saw, a very condensed and very compact event, is precisely to bring some key ideas, some of the key findings from our project. This is a project that has lasted for 5 years, and as Christopher mentioned, the drone landscape in Norway and in the world, but I would say particularly in Europe has changed quite a lot, and particularly in Europe is relevant to emphasize because even though Norway is not a member of the EU, Norway is fundamentally impacted by the policy and the technological and the research and development policies that are developed by the European Union. We will certainly get much more into that throughout the day. During the project, as Christopher said, we had always the intention of combining state-of-the-art academic research that we try to publish in the best journals, and that where we really try to push the boundaries of interdisciplinary research when it comes to drones, particularly issues of security, regulation, and imagination. So I've put that on top of the slide. These are the 3 key vectors of our project that are to be found in our project description from 5.5 years ago, and that were the topic of our opening conference, and that will still be the topic today, because these are really, we understand these to be 3 dimensions that cannot be disentangled from each other. Throughout the project, we published 8 peer-reviewed articles and peer-reviewed book chapters. We have 3 others that are currently under review and another one that will be submitted soon. We've organized quite a few events in Oslo, but also in Paris and in Brussels. We have here the picture of one of the events in Brussels that we organized together with Carnegie Europe. But it was always important for us also to reach out to the wider community and to the wider society. And this is something that became more and more relevant as the years went by, and the drone problematic became more relevant at the policy level. We've written, countless op-eds, blogs, etc. We wrote policy briefs. There is an example there, societal acceptance of civil drones in Europe, for example. We participated in or hosted and organized many podcasts. We have an example down here of one of the podcasts that Arthur Holland Michel hosted at the Carnegie Council. And we also wanted the academic dimension and the basic research dimension of the project was obviously very important to us, and that was manifested in those peer-reviewed articles, but they were also manifested in a PhD degree, a doctoral thesis that was written within the project by Samar Nawaz, who is here in the room, of course, and that was defended at the law faculty at the University of Oslo back in June. So these were the outputs of the project. We have hard copies of some of them over there, so please feel free to take a copy. Now, we like to talk about the importance of conveying the structure of a big project as something that we call the elevator pitch. An elevator pitch is something that represents the capacity of you to convey a complex idea in the time that it takes for an elevator ride to take place, right? So you enter in an elevator with someone that you don't know, you press 5, you go to the 5th floor. So what is your project about? And you need to convey that message, and when you come to the 5th floor, the person has all the information that they need. And this is the elevator pitch for the RegulAIR project that we have in our project description. I will not read everything, but I'm just going to say that we had one main research question 5 years ago. In what ways are the Norwegian and EU airspaces reimagined, reconceptualized, and re-regulated in the context of drone proliferation? And this is always in the context of civilian airspace. So this is very important. So our project was not about military strategy, the importance of armed drones in the conduct of war, etc. It's really about the civilian airspace. And then we had, out of that big research question, we have 3 sub-research questions. One that dealt with the new security problems that come out of drone proliferation. A second one that dealt with socio-technical imaginaries. What are the ideas and the imaginations that we have about the future that we project in drone technology today, okay? And regulatory challenges. So from the beginning, security, imagination, and regulation have been the key pillars of the project. And so what I'll be doing now is to convey 3 key messages, 3 key takeaways from each of these 3 dimensions, okay? The first one, when it comes to security, is that drones are an ideal tool to conduct hybrid warfare, okay? Of course, the context of the concept of hybrid warfare can be contested, okay? It may be difficult to define, but it's something that relates to the conduct of hostile activities below the threshold of war, okay? And from this perspective, drones are ideal for this, for the idea of deception, is it really a drone? Is it a bird? Is it a laser? Is it an airplane? Also because of reasons of attribution, it's difficult to attribute one drone incident to one particular actor, okay? And also the idea of detachment, because drones detach the actual activity from the pilot, okay? And this is very interesting, you know, also from a conceptual point of view. We see how some technologies today, they really foment and they really create enmeshment of the body and the technology, for example, cell phones, but drones produce the opposite effect. Drones are about the distance, okay? And then, of course, this is also, drones are also relevant in the context of hybrid warfare because of the psychological stress they can cause on the population that comes out of uncertainty, okay? Second idea, drone-related vulnerabilities widen the scope of individual insecurity. So if we think of security and we take the state as the referent object, then drones can be a threat, okay? If an hostile drone enters, you know, crosses a border into the airspace of another country, this can be framed in national security terms. But it can also become an individual security issue, right? Because if drones cause the malfunction of, for example, critical energy infrastructure, this has the potential to cause insecurity on the population, and so on. And then the third one on the issue of insecurity is that there is a proliferation of security actors that have made the civil airspace a contested arena of security politics. So there is a political and security contestation of the airspace. So the airspace is now one of yet another of those areas that really contest this Weberian ideal of the state as having the monopoly of the use of force. That is not true in many areas, and airspace is one of those areas today. And we see a proliferation of new actors that contests the airspace, you know, authorities, criminals, foreign actors, private security companies, private operators of critical infrastructure, etc. Okay? When it comes to regulation, I also want to put forward three ideas that came out of research, of our research in the project. Much of it came from Samar's PhD. So one is that regulatory challenges when it comes to drones, they exist beyond the law lag. So we are used to, when we think about new technologies, we think, well, there is this law lag, which means that law is always trying to catch up with the technological development. The technological developments are always ahead, and law is always, you know, trailing behind. But the challenges are way vaster than that. So one of them is, for example, inconsistencies across legislation and across regulation. We see that, for example, when it comes to the proliferation of EU legislation and regulation on this, they do not always regulate on the same terms. They don't have the same understanding of concepts and problems, okay? And of course, new patterns, processes, and also voices have emerged, but the problems persist. We were talking yesterday, you know, at dinner, how some of the regulatory problems when it comes to protecting critical energy infrastructure offshore have been existing for 7-8 years and remain today, okay? Other issue when it comes to regulation is that the classical dichotomies in regulation are less relevant. So we were used to thinking in terms of, you know, this is public law, this is private law, okay? Or this is a public actor, this is a private actor. This doesn't apply in these blunt terms anymore. The same with civil and military. You know, the civil-military synergies in the drone fields are not only quite evident, but they are actively promoted by many actors, okay? And also the issue of whether a drone is autonomous and non-autonomous. So these things do not really exist on binary terms, they exist on a continuum. Finally, regulatory initiatives are infused with politics. This is also very important. We see, for example, we are used to talking when it comes about the regulatory power of the European Union, we talk about the Brussels effect. How regulation that comes from Brussels eventually influences other regulations across the world. The GDPR regulation is one of those examples, okay? But what we're seeing today is probably the inversion of this, at least in some domains, artificial intelligence being one of them, okay? Where we see a number of observers starting to talk about the potential Washington effect, where it's actually what we are seeing that the EU is doing today is to deregulate in the same way that Washington and the US does it, and how Washington wants things to be when it comes to the regulation of AI. So this idea that regulation is infused with politics is quite relevant. And then finally, when it comes to imagination, there's also three ideas that we want to bring forward. So the first one that we will hear more about later today is that the civil airspace is a crucial arena to ensure citizens' peace, okay? And our colleague Kristin Sandvik later on will talk about the concept that she's introducing today, aeropeace, okay? That draws on a classical distinction that exists within peace studies between negative peace and positive peace, okay? She has also written a short text about it that was published yesterday, and we have a few hard copies of that over there. Second idea, drone imaginaries are now high politics in Europe. Okay, so what used to be a matter of technocratic regulation, something that was dealt with, trade departments and transportation, now it's really high politics, security politics. Okay, and finally, the EU drone and drone wall initiatives that we've been hearing so much about, over the last 2-3 months. They can be understood as vertical politics. And we will hear one presentation today by Justinas that will be introducing this idea of, from the ground to the stars. So when the EU thinks about protecting its airspace from threats from the east, it is developing programs that go, from the ground, meaning, counter-drone systems, to kind of wider aerial protection all the way to the space. And so there is an article written by Justinas, myself, and Giacomo that is now under review, and hopefully this will also be an output of the project. So I wanted to bring these ideas to the table to kind of to create some common ground for discussions afterwards. And without further ado, I just want to call your attention to our website, where we have all our outputs. Everything is open access, and you have everything from peer-reviewed articles to podcasts, videos, etc. You can follow these QR codes. We also have some nice bookmarks there for the brave you that still read books in 2025. Take one, and with the QR codes you can also access our website. And let's keep the conversation going, because the project ends, but the drones are not going anywhere. If any, they will just be more and more relevant, and we need to keep on having conversations like this. Thank you. And now, without further ado, we will initiate our first panel that will deal with EU dimensions of all these issues, and I will call my colleague Stine Bergersen to introduce the speakers. Thank you.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stine Bergersen. I'm a senior researcher at PRIO, and I will chair this first session today, where we will dive into the world of drone walls, cutting-edge regulations, and what these developments mean for everyday life, and perhaps also what the future might hold. So I will be very short. I will start by introducing each of the three speakers, who will then be given 10 minutes each, strictly 10 minutes each, to give their presentation. And after that, we will open up for questions from the audience. And we will have around 10 minutes for that as well. So please save up your questions and comments for after the last speaker has finished. So we have three really excellent people with us in this panel today. First, Samar Abbas Nawaz. He is a researcher at the Department of Computer Science at UiT, the Arctic University of Norway. His work focuses on the intersection of law, technology, and infrastructure, please, particularly in the context of drone regulation and autonomy. He has published peer-reviewed articles and commentary on EU drone law, challenges of human oversight, and the safe integration of civil drones into European airspace. His recent doctoral thesis, as Bruno already mentioned, was developed within the RegulAIR project, and it explored how self-operating systems challenge existing safety regulations and how legal frameworks can address these issues. Bruno and Kristin Sandvik were his supervisors, and his thesis is one of the most relevant outputs of the project. Then we have Chantal Laoye. She is an associate professor of international studies and director of the Center for Security and Crisis Governance at the Royal Military College Sanchong in Canada. She is the leading expert on European security, emerging technologies, and civil-military cooperation. Her research examines the role of the EU in security governance and the integration of drones into European airspaces. She has held prestigious fellowships, including a Marie Curie postdoc at VUB in Brussels, and has published widely on EU governance and emerging security technologies. She has been a key contributor to the RegulAIR project, leading much of its international outreach work through the organization of successful events in Paris and Brussels, liaising with local partners. And finally, Dr. Justinas Lingevicius. Okay, yeah. He is a researcher at the Vilnius University's Institute of International Relations and Political Science. His expertise lies in international security, technology politics, and EU governance of emerging technologies. He recently defended his doctoral thesis on fortifying digital Europe, agentic security and technocracy in the emerging EU AI policy. His work explores how Baltic states and the EU approach drone technologies and AI in security strategies. And he has contributed to several conferences on military technology and future warfare. So with that, we will start with Samar.
Thank you for the introduction, Stina. All right, so Bruno has said a lot of things about my project, and I don't know what's there to say anymore. I'll try to still focus on some of the things that I think are very important from legal regulatory perspective. So within EU, we have different rules on drone safety. And this is in furtherance of the plans around drone integration rather than drone deterrence. So the EU plans to, or if I would use the word EEA because of Norway, plans to integrate drones into the civilian airspace. At this point, skies are pretty empty except for the unauthorized drones, but the plan is to fill these skies up with commercial drones, recreational drones, civilian purpose drones, basically. For what I use the word civilian drones. And that's what makes it different from the military or law enforcement use. But then, of course, as Bruno mentioned, the dichotomy between civil military, security, and safety are somehow becoming not less relevant, but the whole spectrum is becoming more visible. You can't separate the safety from security. You can't separate the civil and military in current landscape. So the rules that we have on drone safety also try to cover some of the security aspects, like cybersecurity. And this domain, just be mindful, is being handled by aviation safety regulators. Now, aviation safety regulators take pride in the fact that that mode of transport is, does not have so many accidents as other modes of transport. And it's heavily regulated. Rightly so. Manned aircraft requires a lot of infrastructure, and certification bodies and everything are involved in making that happen. So they use the same logic and apply it on drones, and then some problems occur. In 2018, a basic regulation was enacted on aviation, which gave more power to these aviation regulators to focus on drones. And that meant that these rules would apply throughout the European Economic Area. So one thing is that safety and security are being dealt with in these regulations, which is not so common for these aviation safety regulators, because they are mostly concerned with safety. Like even when you talk about aviation security, it comes under the domain of other bodies, and rules are different. But here's this convergence that you can see. So what happens? There's this not just growing pain, I would say, for regulators at this point, but there are too many oddities in this framework. So certain concepts that they are using, which are human-centric and which are also technical, they are out of sync with the reality. So human-centric concept like human oversight, we talk about that in AI systems. They try to regulate it through remote pilot. But the understanding here is that remote pilot will have the same control as a pilot of a manned aircraft, which is not the reality for drones. With more advancements, with more autonomy, as we can call it, drones are not in full control of the remote pilot. Then it also brings the question, what is control? What is oversight? And how do you regulate that? Regulations try to do that through remote pilot, but that creates more problems in the way it defines it. So there's one thing on human-centered concept that laws are failing. This is just one example. So what about technical things? And these aviation regulators, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, is full of engineers. And so we are seeing these rules being made from technical perspective, and they are also failing on technical standpoint. So for instance, they use the term autonomy. Autonomy in general sense is something that is something to refer to something which operates without any intervention, which has its own agency in a way. The way it does in the regulation actually makes it look like either it's fully autonomous or not at all. When you can see that, if drone is flying, it can be autonomous to the extent of navigation, while the pilot would be intervening in case of any abnormality. That is already the case for Google drones that are being operated for delivery purposes in Australia and the US. I was at this event, and one of the representatives from that company mentioned that there are dozens of drones that are being flown in this way, one pilot for dozens of drones, because that makes more economic sense for them. So we are at this level of tech advancement. In that case, when the pilot is intervening, it's not trying to navigate, it's not trying to fly the drone, it's just intervening at that point. So can we think about that intervener as a pilot of a drone, or as a pilot of a drone which is under full control of that pilot? So the thing is, you need to understand these nuances and these contextual realities to define these technical concepts. Now, so these are two important things when we see the technical disconnect. And then there's this another thing that law does, which is, I think, very interesting for myself as someone who's interested in the regulation of emerging technologies, is that law is not just trying to depict a reality, law is trying to create a reality. As Bruno mentioned, that there's this very strong element of imaginary here. And I think there's this something happening in regulatory framework which is also very imaginative and creative. And an example of that is the U-space. U-space is the name given to this traffic management system for drones. And that is supposed to work automatically. That is not supposed to work the way manned aircraft or manned air traffic management works. So you see, it's more fictional, it's something that you can imagine, like drones flying all over the airspace, communicating with each other, flight authorization service, geo-awareness service, weather information service, everything is being communicated automatically, no human in the loop. And that's the idea, because humans would be limited in terms of doing all these things for such a huge volume of drones. That's the ambition, and that is what the regulation also advances. So what do we make out of it? We need to first understand, and this is the second part of my presentation, is ways ahead, of course. So the challenges are there, but this imaginative power of law, this feature makes us understand that we need to realign our expectations from law. I have a legal background, and I am a lawyer by profession, And I understand that lawyers feel a bit weird when I say this, but laws cannot actually do so much. We are already seeing this with GDPR. We are already seeing with how AI Act is being developed and redeveloped. I don't know what's happening to it at this point with digital omnibus and everything coming in. The point is, it's like a loop, you know? It's like you try to fix a problem with something, and then that thing becomes a problem, and then you try to fix that. So you're constantly trying to fix things over and again. And regular production of rules is not a problem. On drones, you have so many regulations, so many. I can tell you, like, very few people are like experts, but even if you talk to them, they don't even know what's happening at this point. So that is not a problem anymore, to have technical guardrails. The problem is that you are putting too much on law, and then it fails. And then you lament about the symbolic value of law. You need to have better understanding, and that's where this idea of socio-technical context that I talk about in my PhD also emerges. It's like you need to take into account the socio-technical reality. These are not just technical issues, these are more socio-technical. You need to bring in more stakeholders. I mean, you're already failing at the union level when it comes to agencies and different bodies working on drones. One body does not know what's the other body doing. This drone strategy 2.0 that Bruno just mentioned, many of the agencies had no idea, some of the agencies had no idea about this. I talked with them. So the point is that you need to, first of all, harmonize things at the EU level, which remains a problem. And then, you need to widen the scope. Are Europeans involved in these decisions? It would be an interesting thing to think about when, even in this audience, how many people over here feel that they were able to participate or are meaningfully informed about this integration of technology into their airspace. So these things are important, and that can only materialize this integration. You cannot imagine materialization by just fixing things at a technical level or at a very regulatory level. No, I think I'm good then. I'll keep it short, 1 minute short. So yeah. All right, thanks. Should I have a seat now?
You can sit there. Chantal?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. It's a great moment. I want to congratulate, of course, Bruno for his amazing leadership, but Samar, Christian, Arthur, I did not see him yet, but happy for this moment that we can share our outcome with this project. I should not be too long. I will try to stick to my 10 minutes following up about what has been said already. So what I would like to address in these few minutes is how can we understand the EU position or reactions toward all the drone incidents in the last months over critical civil and military critical infrastructure. We should highlight this. It was for me kind of surprised to see so many people surprised about the situation, because we should have in mind that at the EU level, since at least 2014 with the first drone strategy, but even from 2010 there were discussion, consultation to see first what could be the role for the European Union to face the challenges, to address the challenges towards the drone proliferation. So there were discussions since more than 15 years. So in the last months, to see so many EU representative, EU member states to say this is unprecedented, that was true. The fact that there are probably Russian drones over critical infrastructure in the European airspace, this is of course unprecedented. So the surprise came from this aspect, as we can frame it as probably as a hybrid threat. And this, the EU have not been prepared. It was not in the approach followed to address the drone issues. And maybe if I can make an overview with you, that will help to understand what the EU have done in the last 15 years and where we are now. So the first, maybe I will try because in the time to address 3 points. So how the EU regulate drones and how this have evolved, so we can identify kind of 3 aspects. To regulate drones to boost the market. This was the first phase that I will give some few points. Then I want to address the shift. And 2022, we already mentioned with Samar and Bruno the drone strategy 2.0, who tried to address in a comprehensive view new challenges, and especially to answer this need for synergy in the EU, the civil space defense industry to be more in line, so to address also to be in line with the EU approach. So this shift and the regulation to address the dual use of the airspace, as Bruno mentioned, so regulate to accommodate military drones in the civilian airspace. So that's the 3 aspects. So that I will quickly highlight. So the first phase, so the first drone strategy, if we go back to the turn of 2010 when there were the consultation, so the Commission took the lead to see what could be the role of the EU. There were a clear objective to take a distance at that time from the military drones, the drone of use, especially by the Americans and different countries, so not to be in this scenario, but really to work on civil drones, the booming sector, and to see what could be the role of the EU to boost the market. And it became clear that if you want a market for, of course, the EU representative, and also all the, well, the aviation authority, it should be, you should, of course, have the social acceptance, but mainly you should assure people that will be safely introduced in the sky. So the notion there is, of course, safety more than security, and the EU play a lot with this concept for the first part. And what is interesting is to see who is behind. So at the heart of all the EU process is the European Commission, but inside the European Commission, as you know, there are many DG, and it was DG Move, and especially the aviation safety, who lead the process, and had in mind that, of course, this drone should be integrated in a safe way in the airspace. And then the regulation is all about to give parameters, and there's different categories. I will not go into details, but to make sure that they are safely integrated. When the European Commission mentioned security, it was more in terms back then about the societal concern that it might be about data protection, confidentiality, if drones fly over your garden when you are in batsuit, and it was all this concern. And I give example that was always coming the first. So it was this kind of concern, and of course about the fact that drones should not fall on someone or on something. So it was this kind of security concern, because we were thinking about that the drone, they will come in the sky and the airspace eventually. So it was really at that level, and that comes with, of course, research developments to make the technology following in this safe development. And about the market, everything was about the market, but the market needed the regulation. And I attend so many big events, and that was the buzzword. It should be safely integrated, so we need regulations. And you had always the industry pushing for speeding up the regulation to make sure that was fine. So we are in this first phase with the first drone strategy 2014, as I mentioned. We clearly highlight this aspect. So to boost the market, you need the regulation and you need to push the research. Then it's interesting to see that DG Move, of course, was always interacting with other DGs, other actors. And there were actors from DG Home who started at some point to really push hard the idea that there may be other threat than just data protection, and that, of course, the threat posed by terrorist use of drones. They were, as you know, from 2015 and the following years, many terrorist attacks in Europe. So there was also the idea that maybe terrorists might use drones, and then different scenario came up. So the strategy in 2022 is to include, first, to be in line with the more comprehensive approach of synergies between civil space and defense industry, so to open up and to be to make it clearer that drones are dual-use technology, so the idea to push also for dual-use research was there, but the main addition was the announcement of a counter-drone package who came the year after with a communication proposing, for instance, the creation of a counter-UAS expert group who is still working on what kind of regulation do you need to also address the terrorist dimension, the misuse of drones, and also having a different measure. I see I go maybe a bit too much in details, but is the enlargement or the broader vision that came. And of course, and I did many interviews, and the war in Ukraine, the use of drones after the full-scale invasion, the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, should always frame it like this, the use of drones who have opened up also many newer possibilities, also start to scare many people also in DG Home, saying, you see all the potential there, always having in mind the misuse of drone by non-state actors or terrorist group. And so that was one of the approach also, who were bringing some regulation, and it's still so in discussion. And I did interview until last May. I was still in Brussels, and people interviewing the Commission, they were saying, well, as there is still no major attack in Europe by drones, so the interests of states are more or less there, and we are still in these scenarios because we don't have any other case. We should have also remind us that since 2018, many drones have fly over airports from Gatwick in the UK and Germany, and then they were always some isolated case. Now, of course, they are since months more important. But many things can be said on this, but that was the stage. And what I wanted to add in my presentation is to give a full picture that over the European Commission, they were the European Defence Agency, really involved because because the sky is a dual-use resource, so military are using the sky. When they saw all the initiative from the European Commission, thinking about the introduction of drones, integration of drones in the airspace, the military, they wanted also to benefit from the idea that they can maybe fly their military drone across Europe without having to ask to make the administrative paperwork for each zone they want to cross, and to fly their military drone, make it short, and non-segregated area, so where the civil airplanes, but drone eventually will also fly. So we should have in mind military have been always highly interested from early stage to be involved in the discussion, and they became quite involved also for the third category, the certified one for the bigger drones, where they are really involved with EASA to develop the regulation. But also for the accommodation phase. So there's all the idea that they will, and they start to test flying military drone and area where it's officially a civil area, and to fly the military drone eventually as civil following the same criteria. And they are also involved. So I know my time is 1 minute. So to warm up, what I wanted to play with you with the regulation security. So we see that security have been defined in different ways. So at the beginning, they were clear, I think, intention, and that's the Commission also competence landscape to say in the civil scope of things. So to really keep a distance from different, the military aspect. But we have seen this definition evolving, and also because the actors have also changed, even inside the Commission. If I can remind the new Commissioner for Defense and Space, who is the one who, with their representative, present the last readiness roadmap, including the drone, the European Drone Initiative. And it's interesting that these documents almost do not in any kind of way mention all the work done about integration of drones, because there's a lot of lessons learned there. So there is still to come back on one point of Samar, maybe about how the information is shared, or to have the full spectrum of what is possible inside the EU. I was also surprised that this was not clearly mentioned. And I will stop here, and I'm happy to answer any question. Thanks.
to find my slides. If you can, please. I'm a Microsoft user, so. Excellent, thanks. Thanks a lot. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks, Bruno, for this kind invitation. So I'll follow up two excellent presentations by bringing a bit of a regional perspective. And both Samar and Chantal, they were discussing the development of drone regulation and the EU's approach towards that. And the Baltic perspective brings a bit of a different approach because it's very much focused on the military element and the security element that actually appeared only after 2020, this full-scale invasion in Ukraine. And this idea that Bruno already mentioned, the drone wall, that also is moving around, I think, in recent months. It's a very sophisticated term, and when we try to define it and when we try to look at it, what does that actually mean? So this architecture and these different technologies, including radar, sensors, drones, anti-drone systems, they really suggest a very sophisticated element with many questions of how to implement that, both technologically, but also in terms of covering the entire perimeter of the EU, including different regions and so on and so on. So in my presentation, I would like to focus more on the political debate and the political dynamic that is involving both in the region and also in the relation with the EU, and how and what political divergences emerge in this case. So even when we speak about this drone wall, and Chantal already mentioned this roadmap that has been released a few weeks ago, in the Baltic region, this evolution of the drone wall has been also evolving for quite some time. And the first idea came with this illegal migration from Belarus, when the Belarusian regime orchestrated the illegal migration and started pushing migrants both to Lithuania, Latvia, and Poland. Then Lithuania and other regional countries decided that we need to build a wall. The EU said that this is not the nature of the EU, we are not building fences. So then the regional countries said, that, so okay, we will build them by themselves. So you can see those fences being built. And then they said, okay, so then we will bid for funding to equip this wall, these fences, to technologize, modernize them. And for example, drones were bought as well to surveil, to track those migrants moving around. But this was presented not as a security element, not as a drone wall element, but as a regular modernization of the border management funded by regular EU funds. Another move was, and still is, this corruption cases, if I can put it in that way, that have evolved towards the hybrid attack, and I can talk about this a bit later. So smugglers are using these weather forecasting balloons and then bringing cigarettes from Belarus to Lithuania, and they are also using drones in that case. And this was also brought to the EU, suggesting that we need to have this drone wall, the technology installed for the border management, that the officials can trace those movings, and they can also detect and maybe even neutralize those balloons coming to the country. However, both Estonia and Lithuania announced earlier this year that this bid to have this drone wall to deal with both migration and smuggling was refused by the EU. So again, these ideas were refused, keeping this as a regional issue. And then we have the events during the summertime, these drone incursions that happened both in Lithuania and in Poland. So here you can see this Russian Gerbera drone that was found in Lithuanian military area. So the military was searching for it for 3 days and managed to find it, and it was with explosives somewhere in the forest. But it means that it was perceived as a military threat, not only as a hybrid element that related with migration or with smuggling, but in this case with the military one. And of course, the amount of drones being incurred in Poland made this case even stronger. So what we saw after the summertime, that the issue was already acknowledged and recognized on top of the EU. And here you can see the quote by the Commission President saying that, okay, so we need to build this drone wall. The time has come, mainly focusing on this military element and drone incursions that we had during the summertime. And based on this statement, the Defense Readiness Roadmap for 2030 was released in October, and it focuses on 4 flagships, but these 2 elements, these 2 flagships, the Eastern Flank Watch and Defense Initiative, they come together in some kind of this idea of drone wall, also putting these different technologies together, that we need sensors, radars, drone, anti-drone systems, and also what Bruno mentioned, making it rather sophisticated and vertical defense, which includes both sea, land, air, but also the space. And what was also maybe a part of the political conversation, that it shouldn't be focused only on the Baltic region, it should also include the Black Sea. I'm not sure where the Nordics stand in that plan, but making this as a perimeter, also raising a question to what extent this project can be implemented and what kind of technologies we need to develop and purchase to have this project done. And it's also important that this roadmap was driven by 2 Baltic politicians. So Šaltan also mentioned the Defense Commissioner, who is Lithuanian, Andrius Kubilius, and also the High Representative Kaja Kallas, who is Estonian. So it was very much driven by the Baltic people in the Commission, suggesting that this problem or this issue now comes from the periphery and becomes a matter of the center, a matter of Brussels. However, it was not, I would say that it was not well received, and this divergence between the center, Brussels, and then the Baltic states remain in flux, and you can see some headlines and some quotes suggesting that local companies and governments, they keep moving with their own pace. They keep moving with their own ideas. So there are already some initiatives by local companies developing and producing certain elements. There is even a lack of regional cooperation, and we can see that Estonia and Latvia start doing their own thing rather than cooperating and doing things together. And then again, this makes now this EU idea of the drone wall, which is very sophisticated and covering the entire perimeter, also under the question. And why is the case? And I suggest that putting in the broader perspective on this digital sovereignty and the approach towards technologies, and what Chantal also mentioned, the focus on drones as something dual use, something about the market, maybe about the defense industry rather than the military element. And it causes a different perception, because in the Baltics, especially after 2022, it was perceived that, okay, drones become more accessible and more affordable. So we as small states can use them to boost our military capacity. We can develop our national military capabilities. We can fund our own defense ecosystem. And in this way, we can also suggest a point of insurance for our societies, that even if we are small, we can still defend ourselves, even if, for example, NATO partners keep discussing to what extent these countries are defendable or not. So this different perception in terms of urgency and survival puts the European approach towards digital sovereignty and the Baltic approach towards digital sovereignty very different. And I suggest that this also comes, the same perception and the same approach also comes to the case of the drone wall, where the EU puts it in this very sophisticated vertical territorialization scheme, while for the Baltic states it's very urgent. We need to deal with balloons, we need to deal with drones, we need to have a response now, rather than this sophisticated plan. And what also happens with drones in the region as well, that around 2023, 2024, I mentioned this affordability and accessibility as something that brings this boost, that we can defend ourselves and we need to develop technology. And there was a lack of also reflection about that not only the small states can use this element, but there is also an issue or a risk of proliferation, and that other actors may use drones for hybrid actions. And the last events, those incursions that I mentioned during the summertime, they demonstrated that risk is not only the way to boost our own capacity, but there is also a new reality, which brings new level of insecurity. So this move from hype to fear related to drones is also very much noticeable in the region, emphasizing or even amplifying this difference between Brussels and then the Baltic capitals. So just to conclude, I would maybe mention a couple of points here that even though now we have this plan in place, I mean the drone wall plan, which is acknowledged or recognized in Brussels, though we have seen some discussions within the member states. I think both France and Germany are rather opposing towards this plan. We also see these political tensions and these different discussions of how to put that technologically and who will actually drive this forward. And I think this also fits within this broader tension between the center and then the periphery. What is the sense of urgency within the region and how this urgency is perceived in other capitals further from the border. So I would maybe finish here, I think just on time, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much to all three of you, and thank you also for keeping the time. So I think this has been a very nice start to the day, very insightful, and it's obviously clear that drones are no longer futuristic gadgets. They are actually contributing to reshaping security and society across Europe. So I will now open the floor for some questions. We have time for a few. And I would like to ask you to briefly present yourself and to really keep your question short so that we have time for everyone who wants to speak. And I would also like to remind you that there will be plenty of time for networking and discussions for everyone who is interested during lunch and beyond. So with that, the floor is open. Yes?
Hi, my name is Giovanni.
There is some microphone.
Oh, thank you. My name is Giovanni Dini. I'm a visiting researcher here from Barcelona, from the Autónoma. And I've got a question for Justinas. You mentioned digital sovereignty, which is what I study. And so I'm wondering, you had a very nice table at the end showing the differences and conceptions of digital sovereignty, which is obviously a moving target and a changing term all the time. Is the Baltic conception sort of set to influence wider European digital sovereignty? Is it sort of permeating from strategy to survival? I noticed that in particular, that difference. Thank you.
Thanks. Shall
Yes.
I answer? Or?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that the difference remains, and I'm not entirely sure that this digital sovereignty, in the case that the EU builds it, that it moves, that it clarifies the notion of security, because what we see there, so we see this discussion that we need to increase technological control, that we need to reduce interdependence, that the game is bigger and wider in terms about the relation with both the US and China. And security is somewhere there, but I think the EU's perspective involves more elements in there. While for the Baltics is very much about survival and very much military-focused approach towards technologies. And I think this differs because I would say the Baltic one is very narrow, while the EU is quite wide, and then I think the concept itself becomes a little bit ambiguous. Because then it becomes a matter of the case what technology you take and which policy dimension you take. Yeah, so I think the important change is this defense element, because I think we were also discussing that previously we haven't seen the EU, or at least the Commission, being so open about the military element, and now this defense roadmap is about boosting military capability. So this is, I guess, for the first time the EU is so explicit about the military capability building. But I'm not entirely sure, is it a part of the digital sovereignty agenda, or is it a part of this search for a response towards a crisis, trying to loop somehow into something bigger? And where is this where the digital agenda starts and then security ends? I think it's a bit unclear now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Torbjørn Frøsnes. I was Norway's ambassador to the Council of Europe at the time when we negotiated the Council of Europe Framework Convention on AI and human rights. And I would like to ask the panel what kind of relevance you see in applying the provisions of the European Framework Convention in your work on defining criteria for remote control of drones based on AI. You may know that the European Union is a signatory to the convention, which was signed in Lithuania, in Vilnius, in September last year. But since it's open also to countries outside the Council of Europe, it has also been signed by Canada. And incidentally also by the United States, by the former government, I may say.
Thank you. Who would like to pick up on that? Maybe all of you?
I can start.
Someone? Yes?
So the convention on AI that you mentioned, you're right, that came last September. I have been working on the synergy between AI Act and these remotely piloted aircraft systems, if you want to call them. And there is this mismatch in terms of what AI Act wants to achieve and what drone regulations are. And then there's definitely a room for more work in terms of what AI safety requirements entail and how drones are regulated. So for instance, there's this disconnect between what is considered high-risk AI system in drones, in drone regulations, and what is considered high-risk AI systems in the AI Act. Now mind you, I'm talking about the AI Act right now, I'm not talking about that convention. And already this different ideas bring a lot of tensions in the discussion, where can you consider what's considered high-risk drone as high-risk AI system? Not necessarily. Because the AI Act follows certain safety logic, product safety logic. It's no longer a product safety framework, it's more about also product safety and fundamental rights, but we have this tension with drones where high-risk AI systems are considered something else, which are more in line with certification and those things. But to your question, I don't have a clear answer to the convention point. If anybody else wants to.
No, I mean, something to it.
Maybe just very briefly what Samar mentioned about this focus on fundamental rights and democracy, and I think both the AI Act and the convention, I think they both focus on the same elements, but at the same time it's very much unclear how this will be assessed and how this will be measured, and I think the current discussion, especially in the EU case, how to implement the AI Act demonstrates the difficulty to measure those risks, and especially to anticipate and make this future-proof. And I think that this will still need some kind of development, and how to do that.
Thank you. One final question. Kristin?
Kristin Sandvik, UAO and PRIO. So thank you for great presentations. I thought it was quite funny that when I was traveling into Lithuania a couple of weeks ago, I couldn't get to Vilnius. I ended up in Kaunas because of the balloons, and you couldn't get here also because of the balloons. But I think this is going to be repeated in a panel later on today by my fellow panelists. But I have a question about Ukraine and sort of how Ukrainian R&D and deployment of drones, rapid innovation cycles, live testing, but also increasingly opening sales offices in Berlin and Copenhagen. How do you think Ukraine drone development is going to sort of impact civil airspace in Europe? My general concern, I think, is that we're going to see platforms that are armed used and end up in law enforcement context, basically, but also as vehicles of crime. Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, short. Okay, then short, from my perspective, I think from the beginning of the war in Ukraine, it's already an impact about what kind of use can be done with civil commercial drones transform, and that's raised this concern. So there's this aspect. About, I think we have seen also in the defense readiness roadmap the idea to include the Ukrainian expertise and the development of the European expertise. And in many regards already, Ukrainians are involved in developments of the drone industry. So I think the impact is direct there in many regards, in terms of the potential of drones use and different way, even they are commercial, and also about the expertise in the industry. But I will leave time for my colleagues.
So again, maybe from a regional perspective, for now, the Ukrainian experience is provided as a selling point. For example, for companies that are developing drones or other emerging technologies within the region, they're saying that these are tested in Ukraine, they are tested in a war zone, so you should buy that because they have a real-time experience in the war zone. And this is now used as an argument to please buy it.
Okay, thank you. This was a insightful and very good start today. Please join me in thanking the three excellent speakers.
We will now be moving to the next panel. In the next panel, we will have two junior researchers, two master students that are writing or have written their thesis on topics that relate to drone development in Norway. So I thought that this was quite interesting, that we see academia responding to the political developments, and I thought it would be very important for us in the audience that work on these issues, or that have been working on these issues for several years, to see what are the issues that concern younger generations, but also where is the research at the moment. And so I will invite Heval Turan and Mathilde Lindenskov. Heval has submitted his thesis at TIC, which is the University of Oslo's Department for Innovation and Technology and Society. And Mathilde is still writing her thesis under a master's in Peace and Conflict Studies. So two different disciplines. I will give first the floor to Heval, and I will bring up your PowerPoints.
Thank you so much, Bruno, for inviting me to this meaningful event. I have a background in STS and innovation studies, actually more lent towards innovation studies, and I've been really intrigued by the idea that innovation and technology is something that has societal implications, moving beyond from a Schumpeterian approach where we think of innovation and technology as merely for economic growth. So delving further into this, I've tried to do specialization programs in ethics and ethical considerations, and saving the most interesting case for my master thesis, I went with looking at how drone companies, first and foremost, applies RRI, Responsible Research and Innovation, within their innovation and technology development. And as a second research question, I looked at if those principles still remain when technology is transferred into defense procurements. So just briefly about RRI, it was developed as a conceptual approach or a conceptual framework in a time where there was a lot of rapid emerging technologies which we didn't know the consequences of. Later it progressed into becoming a policy instrument adopted by Horizon 2020, which is kind of the famous funding body that adopted it, and also the Norwegian Research Council, which still uses it today. So mapping RRI principles in drone companies in Norway, I found the congruence analysis approach to be really helpful, as it is a theory-centered approach, and I had the theory-centered research question. So I had the theory, and I derived some expectations or hypotheses. So as you can see, I can talk more about this later, but if RRI is if it is practiced, we will see X, Y, Z. So that was kind of my hypothesis, just in a nutshell. And then I obviously got some findings after going out and having interviews. So the hypothesis kind of gave me a roadmap. And my findings were that there are some degree of responsible research and innovation practices in Norwegian companies. For example, the mechanism of anticipating really early in the innovation process, but other concepts or other dimension of RRI I couldn't find, which I can also speak more about. I have only 5 minutes, so I have to race. But I concluded that RRI isn't mature enough to be applied. As one of my informants put it, he asked me, how can you expect me to be the most responsible and at the same time actually developing technology? Because it's really resource, it takes a lot of resources, and the companies I interviewed were very small. So that was something that was difficult. At the same time that I was doing interviews, I also did an observation. And what I concluded with after the observation was that we should probably move beyond these rigid frameworks and think kind of outside the box when we are dealing with ethical considerations. So when I went to Eggemoen Aviation and Technology Park in Hønefoss, I saw this kind of cluster environment where the companies were really good at holding each other responsible and having kind of this learning process where you meet each other, and it was like, I felt like the companies were really reflected on responsible innovation and at the same time on how to kind of develop technology kind of fast. So yes, I think that's it. Thank you, guys.
Perfect. Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Mathilde Lindskov, and I will now present my master thesis, which I will hopefully submit in May. And I will be writing about how the Norwegian media address and potentially discuss the ethical implications of Ukrainian drone use. So first, a very quick justification of the selection of context and case study. So, the war in Ukraine stands as a very suitable place for contemporary drone research, not only because it's a war that is heavily characterized by the extensive use of drones, but also because it's a conflict that has introduced a lot of new dimensions worth concerning. So, and this is arguably due to the use of commercial drones for military purposes. But why should this discourse be present in Norway? So, First of all, the Norwegian state and Norwegian companies are actively providing drone technology and drone components to Ukraine, and also drones. But another aspect which might be a bit more striking is that Norwegian civilians are either donating drones or having fundraisers to gather money to buy drones, and buy drones such as the Bayraktar drone and send to Ukraine. And the reason why this is striking is because it stands as a contrast of the norm of civilians providing humanitarian aid and not military aid. And then, why should this be present in the Norwegian media, and how could it potentially influence the perception among civilians about drones? So the media serves as a channel for civilians to stay informed, but also critically reflected upon warfare, such as drone warfare. It can also be a place where militarism potentially can be portrayed and normalized within the public sphere. So before I go on, just a quick clarification of the research gap. So I would not be the first person to look up about the ethical implications of Ukrainian drone use, because that is quite established in the literature right now. And I would not be the first researcher to look at how the Norwegian media has been writing about drones in the past, because that has been done by Rune Ottosen, for example. But as far as my knowledge go, I would be the first to look at how Norwegian media is writing about the Ukrainian drone use right now and the ethical implications it might raise. So, what are these ethical implications I'm talking about? So these 5 arguments will be kind of my guiding framework and what I will be looking for in the media. And the first aspect is of the accessibility and affordability of drones. So we know that drones have become relatively cheap. And then one can ask what happens when war becomes cheap. Can it potentially lower the threshold for war? This accessibility and affordability has also affected some traditional military and civilian roles. This conflict has normalized an integration of civilian technology and knowledge within the military used for military purposes. It has also normalized somewhat of integration that civilians are either donating their drones and also actually producing drones, for example, with 3D printers. And this also happens in foreign countries where they, for example, drive to Ukraine with the drones. And this raised some issues that what happens with the traditional frameworks or legal protections of civilians when they're moving to somewhat weapon suppliers. I would also be looking for the quite established argument that living under drones can cause psychological trauma. But this argument is not only relevant today, but I think this aspect is also highly accelerated. And this is also due to the use of commercial drones. It is now more difficult to know the purpose of the drone. So, is it a weaponized drone? Is it a drone for surveillance? Or is it a hobby drone? Can it be sent by a state actor? Is it potentially a terrorist group? Or is it just a civilian? I would also look at another quite established argument of we wonder, how does remote operation affect the perception of killing, and how can it affect the mental health of a soldier? And this is also potentially accelerated with extensive use of drone. We also raised some questions about how we know that drones potentially reduces the human cost on the domestic side, and it can lower some political and moral barriers. And we have been talking about how this potentially lowers the threshold for war. But then if you combine it with the argument that war suddenly becomes cheaper, then again, what happens with the threshold for war? Finally, the element of AI and autonomy. So we learned a lot today about how AI and autonomy potentially can affect warfare as well in the future and how we operate drones. And I think this stands as one of the very important aspects of what we should be looking for and talking about when we discuss contemporary drone warfare. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Okay, thanks so much. This was a very good first half of the program. Now we have a 10-minute coffee break. Please be back in the room at 10:15. We have some coffee there in the back. Thank you.
We are ready to start the next panel on drones into the future. So my name is Giovanni Dini. I am a PhD researcher at the Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona, and I am studying e-digital policies. I'll be chairing this panel centered on the future of drone technology. Our three participants will each provide a 10-minute presentation of their ongoing work on the future of drones, after which we will welcome questions from the audience, as well as see if there's some discussion between the panelists. And I'm very pleased to introduce three very highly qualified and esteemed thinkers. So we have Professor Kristin Bertora Sandvik from the University of Oslo, Thane Greenwood, and Arthur Holland-Michel, who are both leading writers and thinkers in this area. So starting with Kristin, she's a law professor at the University of Oslo and a research professor in humanitarian studies at PRIO. Kristin co-founded and directed the Norwegian Center of Humanitarian Studies. She teaches ethics, sociology of law, legal tech, AI, and robot regulations. Kristin is a key component of the RegulAIR project we're bringing to a close today, and has been since its concept stage 6 years ago. Her most recent book is titled Humanitarian Extractivism, published by the Manchester University Press. And please do look out for her next title on humanitarian regulation, a chapter of which we have here for you if you'd like to take a hard copy with you. And this chapter deals with drones in the humanitarian sector and is available, like I said, at the back for you to pick up. Next, we have Thane Greenwood, who is a consultant and journalist and expert in civilian drone technology, geographic information systems, open source intelligence, and humanitarian aid, as well as in data policy and ethics. Since the Ukraine war began, Greenwood has maintained a database of incidents related to drone use in the conflict and continues to monitor how this new technology is being used in battle. Thane has been published by Foreign Policy, Bellingcat, and Slate, and regularly publishes a newsletter that serves as essential reading to those interested in drones, AI, technology ethics, humanitarian aid, and many adjacent topics. It's also written very well and can be quite funny as well. Finally, we have Arthur Holland-Michel, who is a writer and researcher focused on AI, advanced surveillance technologies, and drones. He has written for The Economist, The Washington Post, The Atlantic, Wired, and Vice. His book, Eyes in the Sky, was published by Hudson Mifflin Harcourt in 2019. And Arthur has conducted research for the UN, the Red Cross, Chatham House, PRIO, and the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs. He is a founder and former director of the Center for the Study of the Drone at Bard College. His work on counter-drone technologies going back to 2018 remains very influential today. He's also a key member of the RegulAIR team and has been a part of different PRIO projects since 2018 as well. So, if you would join me in welcoming to the stage Kristin Sandvik. Thank you very much.
Hi, great to be with you today. I was just cleaning up old inboxes the other day, and I found the first drone paper I ever wrote, which was The Rise of the Humanitarian Drone back in 2012. And we had many ideas about drones, and some of them seemed overly negative at the time. But I think in hindsight, it wasn't completely off. On the other hand, drones have become a very useful and important tool for a number of important sort of tasks in our society. So this isn't going away, right? But when we started the RegulAIR project, and I don't want to repeat everything that's been said today, I think we've had a very insightful presentation so far. But we thought we were going to sort of follow this regulatory pathway. You know, Europe has been a very slowly evolving drone jurisdiction in a way. It's been starts, stops. For the industry, it's been extremely frustrating. Fragile startups have really struggled to sort of, get to a market, and it's been very difficult to develop a market until, you have sort of a regulatory opening up of the European airspace for drones. But we thought that, from 2018, things were going to sort of, come along. And then, the Ukrainian war starts. And it's probably in hindsight, it's not the only radical shift, but it's really changed how RegulAIR has unfolded and also how we think about regulating European airspace today. So what you're going to get now is sort of a peace researcher perspective on the future of this airspace. It's not a security studies perspective, it's not a legal perspective. Although I have to say for Samar, you know, like given that everything else is going so badly, you know, we still have to try to hope for law. Didn't I teach you this? No, but I think you know what Bruno was saying. We've really seen a closure of the regulatory momentum, or at least sort of radical redirection of this momentum. So it's been towards national security, and there's also something weird going on. We had an interesting conversation last night about drone sightings and the difference between actual drone sightings and drone sightings, and drone sightings sort of as a public sport where it's kind of, it's an airplane, it's a star, it's the fact that I haven't really cleaned my glasses for the last week. But you know, we don't really have a good way of sorting the drone, sort of actual drones in our airspace that shouldn't be there from what people perceive to have seen. And I think it's something as a community we probably need to have more discussions about, but it's really changed sort of how we think about things. And Ukraine war, obviously, with the R&D, with the opening of European markets to drone manufacturers, and with sort of the longer consequences. So things changed. And I'm thinking that I want to say something about the future of drone regulation here, namely that it's more about airspace than drones. And this is why I want to put this very unfinished concept to the table called aero peace. It's not air peace because, you know, you have air conditioner, air freshener, everything, but aero peace. Speaking also a little bit to aerospace, but aero peace. So I'm going to make my case here. You're very free to disagree and pick me apart. But I'm thinking that it is useful that we as peace researchers and critical scholars try to sort of conceptually push it a little bit. And we can get pushbacks, but I do think that we need to see what's going on. So I think a very kind of dominant part of the discourse now is you know, focused on defensive approaches. Evolving aerial insecurity, example of cluttering of airspace in the previous presentation. So you have long-standing problem of smuggling cigarettes across the border with Belarus and Lithuania. That suddenly stops being sort of an ignored problem of crime and starts becoming a national security threat. I mean, when you get to Lithuania in Vilnius, I understand there's also, you know, quite a balloon business going on already, where, you know, you take your date on a balloon trip over Vilnius. But you know, balloons are such a common occurrence in the airspace. So what does it mean that this is suddenly not only crime, but it's probably national security? But there's something about the cluttering of airspace that we are increasingly worried about. And then I mentioned the perceived drone sightings. You know, what does it mean to see a drone? You know, we talk about moral panics, but maybe we're in the middle of this drone sighting moral panic. And how do we get out of that and actually distinguish what's real from what's not? And then I think it's the drone wall. You know, Trump wants a golden dome. Are we going to build sort of a drone wall that's a golden dome, or aren't we going to build anything at all? I think that, you know, this is going to be an interesting development to follow, but my concern is that really that we're seeing a very militarized response here. You know, the things, the tools, the components of this drone wall is going to be military technology. And the difference between defensive and offensive responses can be very thin. And also in terms of how you need to keep imagining an enemy to justify your expenses. And then we've had, you know, the other measures that are, you know, airspace closures full stop. So Denmark did this for a week. Increasingly, you have permanent drone bans over critical infrastructure. But you know, you could imagine just full stop, a drone ban. It's possible now, probably wouldn't have been possible a decade from now when sort of the commercial interests were more strongly embedded. And then you have the third one, which I didn't think about yesterday, which was, and its faint point is, in the US you have a lot of Chinese drones flying. So if you ban Chinese drones, hypothetically in European airspace, you know, how much fewer drones would you actually have around if you banned certain countries from shipping drones to Europe? But all of these are defensive approaches, right? And they lead to a militarization of civil airspace, lower civil airspace, and how we talk about this airspace, and how people on the ground see and understand this airspace. And this sort of leads me to the second point, which is the negative peace point, right? So as researchers, peace researchers, we think about negative peace, the absence of violence, and we think about positive peace, which is social justice, accountability, good governance, sort of, social, human security. From a negative peace perspective, if we think about European airspace, this would mean, preventing jamming, preventing cyber attacks, preventing illegal incursions, and preventing armed attacks on civilians. And the reason I'm putting this one in the negative peace bit and not in the defensive peace bit is that I am concerned that we will be seeing school drone shootings, for example. We will be seeing domestic violence by drones. We will be seeing an uptick in attacks by drones. And for civilians, you don't need many of those attacks for sort of large-scale panic to ensue, I think, making any kind of drone traffic much more complicated. 2 minutes only. I thought was going to be very quick. But so the negative piece obviously is a precondition for positive peace, but I don't think it pushes us far enough in thinking about sort of the future. So my idea here is that I'm trying to articulate an idea of positive peace across the dimensions, objectives, and mechanisms. So the first one is that we start seeing lower airspace, not only outer space, as a public commons. Outer airspace is a public commons in the sense that jurisdictional boundaries don't apply the same way. But how if we sort of reconfigured how we looked upon lower airspace. And the second one is the objectives, right? So instead of thinking about, when we think about safety and security, we should think about public safety, and we should think about human security. Protecting human security is not it can't be sort of a zero-sum game that you protect some more and you protect others less. I've been sitting in an EU project once to look at urban drones, and the drone corridors were suspiciously often over poor areas of the city, for example. So the burdens of drone protection and sort of the gaps will probably fall on marginalized communities. But this is something we really need to think about. How are we going to make sure that lower airspace is also a site of protecting human security? And then obviously the mechanisms are not very original. This is going to be a liberal democracy. This is going to be stakeholder conversations. This is going to be regulating that lower airspace with a view to social justice, not only a commercial viability. And I think in closing, you don't have to buy this concept. I'm going to keep pushing it a bit, but expectations have changed. Popular expectations as to what lower airspace is going to be and be used for have changed. So it's not only about ending this war and getting on with business. I think also it's about reconfiguring exactly what do we want to do with this lower airspace, and how is this something that should concern people far beyond the drone community. Thank you.
Oh, that was exactly 10 minutes, so thank you very much. I just need to grab my pen. And next up we have Finn.
Excellent. I got slides on the computer. Yeah, I'll fix it. Oh, great, thank you.
That's got to be a record.
Perfect. All right. Let's make sure that's actually working. Sorry, I'm trying to remember how to make this work. There we go. All right. Hi, I'm Fane Greenwood. I'm a specialist in small drones, which I define as both consumer drones and DIY hobby-built drones. I want to talk briefly today about small drone threats to civilians and how that's rapidly changing globally since 2024. So as everyone here is aware, small and expensive drones are everywhere now. And unfortunately, since about 2024, we've been seeing a really massively expanded use of small drones by armed actors against civilians around the world. So that both in a number of different countries. We're also seeing a really widespread dissemination of small drone warfare techniques. We're seeing a lot of these battle-tested techniques for small drone warfare are being spread incredibly widely on social media, especially platforms like Telegram. And they're being spread by combatants. So the pace of technological development is incredibly fast. It's happening in the open on Telegram in many cases. And many actors were not even directly connected. If you know where to look on Telegram, you can learn a lot about drones and technological developments in a way that was simply not possible in the past. And another important point, too, is that because these are custom-built drones, there is no manufacturer to appeal to. It's not like a product where you can talk to these executives of international interest. It's just DIY drones. They're incredibly hard to control. They're essentially impossible to ban. You can't really ban these things. Now, attacks on civilians with small drones, as I mentioned, have increased pretty exponentially since 2024. For whatever reason, it's become a much more common tactic. I do believe this is a novel threat. I think that this is something that really is different from what we've seen in the past. And unfortunately, there's almost no guidance for people who wish to protect civilians from these drone attacks or for civilians themselves. And there's a number of types of drone threats to aid workers and to civilians. These include, of course, kamikaze drones, consumer drones, and information, among other items. And I'm just going to quickly go through a couple examples of what we are seeing. So, for example, we're seeing human safaris with drones in Ukraine, which is an unpleasant term that, but unfortunately is accurate. I think the Russian fighters came up with this. So they're intentionally targeting civilians in Kherson and other places in Ukraine. They're going after children, old people, school buses, and they're going after emergency vehicles. So that we're seeing this widespread use of drones to spread terror and to attack civilians specifically. We're also seeing a lot of attacks on white helmets workers in Syria. Obviously, this was before the fall of Assad, but in early 2024, the white helmets contacted me asking about this because they were experiencing a number of attacks on civilians in the places they served, which were being carried out by Assadists who had actually been trained by Wagner. And you can also, with these drone attacks in many contexts, you can actually, if you know about a drone attack on a civilian, you can actually go back on social media and find video of that specific drone attack and really connect them back. So Human Rights Watch did that in a number of cases in Ukraine, which is pretty shocking in development. And another area this is happening is in Sudan. So my former colleagues at the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, where I used to work, my old boss, Nathaniel Raymond, is now running the humanitarian lab at Yale, and they've been doing a lot of the satellite imagery analytics of the war in Sudan. And they are seeing a really increased use of all kinds of drones, both medium-range drones and also short-range FPV and consumer drones in Al Fashir and other places. And they've been seeing this increase pretty exponentially in the past few months, which is another example of this dissemination. We're also seeing this happen in Mexico. We're seeing this happen in Haiti. Eric Prince is actually using FPV drones at the behest of the Haitian government to go after gangs, which is causing a lot of harm to civilians. And we're also seeing this in Myanmar. And of course, we're also seeing this in the conflict in Gaza and Israel. So this is a really widely disseminated problem that is unfortunately only worsening. And also to point to this, we also, I think, over-index sometime on kinetic risk, which I understand, but I do think it's important to emphasize that drone data risks are very real. We are doing a pretty poor job, for whatever reason, of documenting this, connecting them to actual operational harms. So I think it's really important to think about not just drones blowing things up, but how drones imagery and data can be used to harm people and to benefit people as well, which is also an important thing to point out. They are incredibly valuable tools for lots of socially beneficial things, which I think is good to emphasize again. And moving on, again, you're not going to be able to ban small drones. It's simply not going to work. They are easy to customize, easy to build. All the electronic parts come from China and they can be assembled elsewhere. Consumer drones make things a lot easier because obviously building small drones is hard and requires a lot of skill. But again, there is really going to be no such thing as a comprehensive ban that is going to be functional, in my opinion. You really have to think of other approaches and tactics for dealing with this problem. We also, I got a little messed up, sorry. We also have issues with small drones mistaking identity. So I've been talking about this for a few years now. We lack good standardized ways to tell small consumer-type drones apart in airspace, especially contested or conflict areas. I believe this is an issue with IHL in the sense that it is hard to adhere to the principle of distinction if you literally can't tell drones apart. we know that armed actors, journalists, and aid workers are all using identical consumer drones in the same conflict areas. In Ukraine, there's a number, I collected many examples of this. So we really need better strategies for figuring out how to tell drones apart in airspace if we're going to proceed in this way in the future, both technically and operationally. This also feeds into another problem, which is that we have poorly defined, I think, legal standards and also ethical standards and operational standards for what to do about civilians self-defending against drones. So in Ukraine, there's been a number of examples of civilians shooting down drones, or also calling information to Ukrainian authorities about the location of drones. They're using radio, they're using electronic warfare techniques. Well, not electronic warfare techniques on their end, they're using detection techniques to detect drone radio signals. So these are obviously civilians who feel they've got no other options, and we're also seeing this in other places, but Ukraine's the best documented example. But where do you fall in IHL in that situation? Do you lose your combatant status? I know of a case where a 15-year-old kid in Ukraine was actually, during the initial full-scale invasion of Russia, he actually used his DJI drone to send back information to the military, which is very helpful at the time. But again, where do these cases fall? So I believe that we do need some more. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an IHL specialist, I just know enough to be dangerous. Which is why I do believe it's really important to get actual IHL specialists and actual specialists in these areas really talking about this further. I think there's a lot of unresolved issues. Of course, the AI developments are making things even more complicated. Though I will say I do think some of the AI stuff is overhyped with drones in the sense that things that have been around for a really long time, like semi-autonomous drone navigation from waypoint to waypoint, is now getting conflated with much more sophisticated AI systems in ways that I think are quite confusing for people. And we also, again, this is what I think needs to happen. We have a lack of guidance for aid workers and civilians at risk of small drone threats. We really need clear, institutionally supported guidance. I do believe there are things that could be done. We need better best practices for helping people defend themselves and also alert against drones in a legally standardized way. We also need legal advice, and we also just need a lot more research on this threat. I think there has not been adequate attention paid to it. And of course, this is happening in these particular areas. I think it's relevant to everybody in the future. And again, so what I think should happen next, just again, proceeding quickly here, I think we need to be writing more case studies and collecting more data describing attacks of civilians with small drones. Human Rights Watch has done some great work in this space, mostly looking at Ukraine. I think there's a lot more that could be done, really kind of contextualizing this global scale of the problem. I think there is a lot of instances in Ukraine, again, it's very well documented, but this is happening in a lot of different places. I think there's a lot of commonalities we could be looking into. And that's also, there's a lot of data set that I've collected. I'm working with the folks from the Ukraine War Archive, some other volunteers. We've pulled down over 100 Telegram channels that have been posting drone information from combatants in Ukraine since 2022. We have all that archived. There's a big research corpus we could be really digging into right now. We also need to document, better understand the drone platforms. We could be developing better tactics for forensic analytics of drone attacks. So after a drone attack happens, we could be doing a bit more to help people say, here's the information you need to collect, here's the evidence, and here's how we can use that to connect that back to war crimes or other things like that. Of course, I think we could probably learn a lot from the combat use of small drones to protect civilians. I think there's a lot of things could be learned from what soldiers are doing to protect themselves with small drones, which is constantly changing, and being able to adapt that for civilian peaceable purposes. And finally, of course, as I mentioned, I think we need more clear legal guidance, so we need high-level discussions about this from actual lawyers, not myself, about how we can figure out the legalities of this. So that was my very brief summary of events, but here is my email. I'm happy to talk anytime, and yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
Okay, great, brilliant. Thank you so much, Fane. We're ready for you, Arthur, for a final talk.
Hi, everybody. First, before I get into it, I think it's worth taking one more moment. There'll be more, just to acknowledge what a tremendous achievement this project has been. And to Bruno especially, I'm just so in awe of everything he's done and all his stewardship over the last, 5 years? How are you feeling, Bruno? Yeah, you sure? Speaking of Bruno, he actually, for this talk, he asked me to do what he always does when we do a PRIO event, a regular event, and he was like, Arthur, I'd like you to talk about the future. And so I thought about my assignment this time, and in the context of the fact that we've been at this for 5 years, it occurred to me that instead of predicting the future, I would actually look back at some of the predictions that we made when we started this project. A little effort in accountability. I mean, God, right? We get paid the big bucks to make predictions. So with that in mind, I was actually curious among the RegulAIR team. And I've got my own, so we don't have to be shy about it. What was a prediction that we made in 2019? I'll look at you. Chantal, do you have a prediction that you made in 2019? It can be a prediction that turned out to be right or one that turned out to be wrong. I'll repeat it so that everyone can hear it. Okay. So the EU would be more of a model of drone regulation by 2025. I mean, 2019, 2025 seemed like so far in the future, right? What about you, Bruno? I'm going to pick on you, sorry.
The fact that drones would increasingly become part of thinking about the airspace and thinking about security problems in terms of volume.
Okay.
Not just thinking of things happening on the ground, but thinking happening.
They would create a three-dimensionality in our thinking around security in the airspace. Has that happened? Okay, good, excellent, well done. Has yours happened? Okay. Oh, okay, great. You just come up here. Now we're talking. Yes, hundreds of thousands of drones in the airspace. That's right. God, did that happen? No. What about drone deliveries? I, for one, have been waiting since 2012 for a burrito drone, and it still hasn't happened. Kristen? Vertiports, yes. Oh, God. Yes, none of that. What's going on? There were all these predictions, as I said, about drone deliveries. Google and Amazon haven't amounted to much in their drone deliveries. And yet, there are some organizations that have been very effective with their drone deliveries. Actually, widespread, perhaps largely automated drone deliveries. Do we know who these companies are? These organizations? They're criminal organizations that are smuggling drugs and contraband and cigarettes into prisons. What about drone swarms? I'd say some very serious researchers, perhaps myself included, believe that by 2025 there'd be drone swarms, military drone swarms. Now, there are some organizations that have been very effective at, multi-thousand drone swarms. Are they militaries? No. They're like fireworks, entertainment organizations in places like China and Southeast Asia. Drone attacks on domestic soil. Do you know the biggest incursion of American airspace, the biggest, most significant incursion of American airspace was in the last 5 years? It wasn't a drone. The balloon, yes, oh my God, we've been wrong about all of these things. Look, I'm not just going to blame others. I also have made some predictions of my own. In 2019, my book, Eyes in the Sky, came out, and I made a very bold prediction. Most of the predictions in the book I kind of hedged, but this one I was so certain about. I didn't say by 2025, but I said eventually cars would have their number license plate numbers on their roofs, because I believed that there would be so much aerial surveillance. I didn't figure that automated license plate readers would be a thing that would be, widely used and available, and we're not going to see cars with license plates on the roofs. Why am I talking about this? Why am I picking on people? Really, it's because I want to make a point about how predictions, they're not just a game, they create our reality. They create our discursive reality. They create a political reality. And perhaps instead of offering some new predictions, but I will, and we can record them, and then in 5 years we can be held to account on them. I wanted to just give like 3 brushstrokes, perhaps, on how we could potentially equip ourselves to be a little bit better at navigating this world of predictions. I think the first is understanding that perhaps we have a bit of a measurement problem when it comes to predictions. I was tossing and turning in bed the other night with Bruno's assignment in my mind, and this. Yeah, no, it's fine. It's quite okay. I enjoy things like that. And this term kept coming back to me, which was, will we know it when we see it, right? And why did that keep coming back to me? And I realized it's because of autonomy is the classic case of a measurement problem. People have been saying, time and time again, we're going to have lethal autonomous weapons that can make targeting decisions on their own, right? But then a drone has some autonomous capabilities, as was the case, for example, in 2020 when a UN investigation said that a drone had been used autonomously in Libya for the first time. And all the wonks suddenly said, no, that wasn't an autonomous drone. What are you talking about? It had some autonomous guidance, perhaps, right? But the fact of the matter is we probably won't know it when we see these things. The drone swarm that we see probably won't look like the drone swarm that we've all been imagining. We talk about imaginaries, right? Autonomy is not some binary. It exists on a spectrum. And I don't think it benefits us to keep waiting for that ultimate moment of full autonomy, of a truly, completely crowded airspace before we actually, understand that we are already in some senses living in that world. I think that another consideration with regard to predictions has to do with accountability. We're penalized for not predicting things that happen. That's one of the worst things you can do, things that no one saw coming. But there's no accountability for making predictions of things that don't end up happening, right? I mean, as a result, there is an overabundance of predictions, I will say, in the market. And that's okay for us researchers, right? We're allowed to make bold bets and these things not to really work out. It's more problematic when those predictions are weaponized by institutions for the purposes of power and marketing. And now we see that, excellent, 2 minutes. Now we see that, in the EU, and I've been in this game for 12 years, and I've seen time and time again, and it only seems to be happening more intensely, that predictions made by companies for the purpose of profit are informing our sense of what is a real risk, what is a good place to put our money, the timelines for when we need to get things done by. People say that there's going to be a Russian invasion in Europe by 2030, And it so happens that prediction is going to be really, really good for companies who say their drones will be ready by 2030. But we've got to understand what the actual practical implications of those predictions having currency is, when in reality there's not going to be any accountability when that doesn't happen. And in fact, in the case of the Russia drone invasion prediction, the really clever thing about these predictions is that if this war doesn't happen and all these billions of euros are spent on drones, the companies can say, that was the deterrent effect. Wow, good on us. So all I would ask is that when you do see predictions in this market of predictions that characterizes our research space, you think about what's motivating them, and you think about the structures that are behind them. And perhaps we exercise some level of accountability with regard to predictions that do come from institutions that have a vested interest in those predictions becoming policy, right? How am I doing for time, Giovanni? I'm finished. Okay, can I just make 2 predictions? Bruno asked me to make predictions, so I'm going to make 2 predictions. The first is that the same. Actually, I'm just going to do one. We talk about the drone wall. We talk about countering drones, and my concrete prediction, and this was alluded to, because Kristen alluded to it as well. These very same technologies that are enabling the drone wall and countering drones are going to provide the fundamental infrastructure, the technological infrastructure for 2 things in particular: autonomy, distributed networking, digital kill webs in warfare, drones, surveillance nodes communicating with each other, which will ultimately give rise to swarm-like capabilities, but also surveillance capabilities that will be used in ways that have nothing to do with drones, that will perhaps also serve those same institutions of power that are making, predictions that keep us distracted. So with that very dystopian final note, I'll cut short and look forward to the discussion with you all. Please stay up here. Okay.
I'd like to invite the panelists up to the stage, please. And we will take questions in just a moment, but I just wanted to see if there were any questions that you might have for each other beforehand. If you'd like to kick us off, or shall I ask?
No, I think thank you for this. I think we've been working also on the side on this aspect of civilian, sort of the attacks against civilians, and from what you said, and I think globally, the evidence from war zone and conflict zones isn't readily applicable to Europe, but I do think that you indicated that there's a fairly systematic use by governments against dissident movements, minority groups. It's not necessarily sort of Islamic State or rogue actors, it's states using those drones against their own population. I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about that, because it ties in very uncomfortably to your ending point.
Yeah, no, I think it feeds into, it's both governments, using them, it's non-government armed actors. So it's really all over the place. I think that's kind of the main point, is that obviously the barrier to entry for using these weapons has reduced. Again, I think my old Natty at Yale has been pointing out that the drones have really ensured that the RSF basically has completely closed the air superiority gap with the SAS in Sudan. That's a really big deal. And of course, we saw this in Ukraine. I think at the beginning of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think lots of people assumed, obviously it'd be over in a week. A lot of people also assumed that the drones, I remember a lot of analysts were saying early on, oh, of course, the Ukrainians are going to use their consumer drones. That'll all be crap out in like a week because they'll use electronic warfare techniques. And that did not happen. So I think we're all, it's this flattening of the battle space, and it's this generally flattening of these threats. But of course, as you said, governments are using them. We're seeing this in Haiti. And I think it is a very disturbing factor. I think we're going to see a lot more of that.
I mean, I'm asking because I think Europe's political future is unclear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I think this is one of the things I think we should be worried about.
Arthur, did you have any thoughts on this question, or shall I move to the floor?
No, let's move to the audience.
Okay, sure.
Please.
Anyone? Yep. Someone?
Thank you, and I'm just going to take advantage of this panel of cool people working on drones for a long time. I mean, I don't know if it's my life or my research of a few years that I'm a bit pessimistic about law and everything at this point. So, but it connects well with what all you three have been saying. What Arthur said. What could we make of our predictions back in 2019? I mean, in your case, 2019. In my case, 2021. I was hoping that in 2025, I wouldn't have to give this anecdotal example of things happening far out in, you know, rural areas. But I think it's also like, isn't it the question of like, how do we frame these debates? Because I think everything, and in my experience, every time I go to these places to talk, it's like, how do we control this? How do we control this? As Fane points out, you know, it's like, it's virtually impossible to control. So, you know, you can have all these regulations and these steps, but the thing is, it's like control is not there. These things will keep on developing in their own ways, you know, this in Ukraine, as we are seeing. So maybe the question is not about how to control. Maybe it's something else that we need to figure out here. If you get what I'm saying. I mean, how do you frame this question? Like, how can we better understand or research about this going into the future? So no answers. You can make it more complicated by asking the right questions, maybe, to end this conference, perhaps.
I'll take a quick stab at it. You know, I think a useful question that I've been asking in all sorts of spheres of my life is that we don't necessarily ask ourselves enough is when we think about our activities and the activities of others, you know, what is at stake? You know, what is really at stake? What are we talking about? And when you look at a lot of the discourse around, you know, regulating airspace or securing airspace, I think that maybe there is some confusion around the stakes being sort of some kind of imminent attack versus the stakes being wanting to seem that you're sort of like technologically ahead and that you're, you know, on the cutting edge of regulatory innovation. You know, the abject fear of something a remote possibility actually happening and you not having sort of done something about it. And then I'll just go back to this point that I keep, you know, harping on about, you know, what's at stake for those influencing these conversations. Once you ask that question of people, but also ask yourself of that question of those you're sort of interacting with and saying, I think some of these questions become perhaps a little clearer.
Okay, great. Christine?
Well, I think it's, you know, I mean, I believe in law. It's what we have. You know, rule of law is better than non-rule of law. And it's not solving itself. But I do think that, you know, one of the things that we could do, or I would like to see happening, is you know, you talked about commercial companies delivering risk predictions and basically frameworks for governance. So let's protest against this, right? Let's claim my aero piece or something else. And you know, I am waiting for example, the tech sector to actually start doing NGO mobilization, to start not necessarily in the shape of NGO, but just, you know, I mean, in Norway, we don't have a foundation that sort of can effectively, you know, do lawsuits, do lobbying for sort of that, you know, tech rights approach. But I would like to see more of that. But I do think that we need stakeholders to get engaged in a different way. It might sound utopian where everyone is just sort of clamoring for money in Silicon Valley. But, you know, something needs to happen. And I do think that we can also, on our side, you know, offer up imaginaries, objectives, norms, goals.
Okay, have you got any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of ways to approach this. I mean, I don't think it's impossible to control drones or to better understand the shape of the problem per se, but I do agree that we're probably not thinking about it in ways that make a lot of sense in many ways. I think we do need a better technical understanding. I think the thing I'm constantly observing is that there is sometimes a gulf between policymakers and analysts, what's actually happening on the ground. That's why I'm really emphasizing that what's happening on Telegram and these open source networks. Obviously, you don't want to over-index too much in open source, but that is where all the chatter is happening. And I'm constantly talking to people who are in communication with the Ukrainians and are actually really on the cutting edge of this. And it's just, those conversations often differ a lot from what is happening in policy. There just is a limited understanding of where the tech actually is. Being into predictions, there's a lot of people both very often over-predict how sophisticated the tech is. As I mentioned, people assuming that things are more sophisticated than they actually are. I think drone swarms, for example, a lot of the stuff predictions were very much based on assuming And also just buying corporate press releases and assuming that they're real when, of course, and there's very limited support right now for technical people who are actually doing reporting and research. It's just bridging that gap is really hard. No one wants to pay for it. So that's a huge problem.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. I think this is key. This is a key discussion, and I'll be very honest. I think that some people in academia have done these efforts of bridging, of reaching out to politicians, reaching out to policymakers, made the effort of going to drone fairs, understanding the technology, visiting the companies, etc. And we do it not because we want to sound relevant, but we want to understand first how the technologies work, so that we can ask different questions, come up with, even predictions, or even if we don't do policy recommendations, I personally don't, but, framing questions in a different way, presenting the problem, bringing some nuance. But I don't see it comes too often to us. So I think that, there's practitioners and stakeholders here in the audience, and we have been, approached by different regulators in Norway and in Europe, and I'm very happy about that. But I think it is an exception, and I think that what Kristin is mentioning, that kind of that we kind of need to do more. I think that if the we is like we society in general, so it's really that there needs to the conversation needs to go both ways. It cannot be just the academics reaching out, and say, hey, we have this finding, we wrote this peer-reviewed article that we were working 2 years on. Look, we made it in a 4-page policy brief. Please read it. This is relevant for you. I think that this needs to happen, and this will keep on happening. That's just how we work. Yeah. But it needs to come a little bit the other way as well. So I think that we can use the networking period of this event, during lunch, to do a little bit more of that. But I want to put this on the table, that it cannot be only us saying, look, we are relevant. It would, yeah.
But I also think, though, that, and now this is becoming a very intra-academic conversation, but you also have many enough academics who are kind of going down the path towards, we can't militarize this fast enough. And clearly they're more attractive to speak to than us. I mean, how can anyone be more attractive than you guys? But, they will deliver more of the message that can underpin whatever development.
Okay, very nice. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yes.
My name is Anantha Krishnan from Urban Economy Forum. I was just wondering, the whole idea of control and the negative aspects of technology has been explained. But Professor Sandvik just briefly mentioned the positive role as well, like in disaster relief, delivery of medicines, these kind of things have been sort of, or environmental disasters to how to prevent them, etc. Drones have indeed an important role. In that context, I'm just wondering, what is the role of UN in this context? We have ICAO for the aviation, civil aviation. Are we thinking of a similar thing when it comes to the drones as well? Thanks.
Okay. The role of the UN.
That wouldn't be, is there any UN left next year? Who knows? I think Bruno is probably, I wouldn't. Samar, can you answer about international institutional anything?
I mean, yeah.
Well, you're a free man now that you finished your PhD.
You'll be graded on this.
Yes.
I mean, your question is basically like if there's any body specifically looking into the drones at a UN level to see about humanitarian uses and everything. Yeah, because I think so an important aspect here is that like even if it's used for humanitarian purposes, it has to comply with requirements of aviation safety. So I think that will be very central, even for those purposes. So, and I mean, ICAO has been working, but it's not so active. It's mostly EASA at European level that is very active. But again, to use these drones for humanitarian purposes, I think there's no special body for that. And that's the thing. This is the fascinating part about drone. It can be used for anything. So yeah, there's no central body for humanitarian use. I don't think so.
Okay, Fane, please.
Yeah, so I've had so again, a kind of depressing thing about this moment is that I started my career with a focus on humanitarian aid and disaster response drones. I really was focused exclusively on positive drone uses, which are incredibly widespread, incredibly beneficial. It's still happening globally. That's why I'm very worried about mass Chinese drone bans in the United States, by the way. That will destroy so many incredibly beneficial things that lots of really good people are doing, and that really bothers me. But to return to your initial question, so I have been involved, like for example, the World Food Program has for a long time had a drone working group that I've been part of. UN OCHA's got some similar stuff. But yeah, there's no overarching international, I remember having conversations about that about 10 years ago, people like Patrick Meyer, about how can we do something like that, and it never really panned out. But I do think it's a problem that unfortunately, again, with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, there's been so much emphasis in recent years on the use of drones for military purposes, and a lot of the conversations about positive use of drones kind of blown out of the water. It's still happening, but it's very hard to get attention for it. And there's just a lot more attention on these warfare uses. I understand that. Of course, the United States, again, with our current lovely administration, that's, of course, worsened. It will become even worse because there's just this massive emphasis on using drones to blow things up and way less emphasis on using drones for things that I really care about, like mapping and data collection for conservation and all that stuff. So yeah.
There was just a normative drone. I mean, we started working, I think my meeting was in 2013, UN OCHA, but it came out of the crisis mapper. So these were people who really, knew stuff about maps. I think what you're sort of alluding to will maybe materialize at the time where climate change is destroying so much of ground infrastructure that you will need to sort of ferry supplies and do mapping and surveillance almost non-stop to sort of figure out how local communities can thrive and survive. I think at that point you will have more organized sort of international organization. But we're not there yet. But a decade from now, things might be different.
Okay.
This isn't a direct response to the question, but it got me thinking about an important point I want to make, which is that when we talk about all these dark and dreary things that can be done with the technology, there is this natural impulse to also allude to the positive uses. Now, this goes to a bad writing habit. I'm a journalist. I'm constantly being harassed by editors about bad writing habits. And for those of us who write about technology in the room, there is one bad writing habit above all that we've all been guilty of, which is that the first line of our publication says, the technology has many beneficial uses. That being said, there are also some risks. That first sentence is such precious real estate. You don't think it. You think it's just like a filler, but it is such precious real estate. And I think it seems like a small thing, but we can disabuse ourselves of the idea that just because we are not explicitly mentioning these positive uses of technology, we don't believe they exist. I, for one, absolutely believe that there are positive uses of these technologies. I saw a video of a snowboarder filmed by a drone, and that is a net positive for society. It was incredible. This was absolutely fantastic. This was something that did not exist before, and now it does. And yet, I'm not going to allude to that when I write something, about how drones can be used for, say, harassing civilians in Kherson. So it's a small thing, but again, I think what we're dancing around a lot is the idea of narratives. In this space. Imaginaries and narratives and predictions and how that actually creates tangible pathways to or away from policy. And so with that in mind, just maybe a small trick in our writing habits could go some way in helping towards that.
So if I can just very quickly, I absolutely agree on the first sentence, and it's far too frequently when studying digital policy that you see there's many benefits and many risks, and yes, I completely agree. Do we have one more question from the audience? Yes, at the back, please.
Hi, I'm Gabrielle. I'm a professional writer and a scholar, and I've been working on narratives for many years. But as I was working, I've been working with the UN for other projects. But as far as drones are concerned, there's a project with the UN Office for Counterterrorism that, by the way, is coordinated by Russian diplomats. So that's a big problem. So you can look into that. So yeah, that's just because I've worked on that. So that I will follow up with some of you afterwards, if you allow me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think that brings our panel to a close. So thank you so much to our three speakers. And if you can give them a round of applause. And please stick around. We just need 1 minute to change over the panels, and we'll continue.
Excellent.
Can you hear me? Yes, I'm on. Very good. Then I'm changing my hat abruptly and becoming the chair of this panel. And thank you for still being here. So RegulAIR would have been nothing without sort of practitioner engagement, and some of you have been with us all the way. And we're excited to welcome a panel on exactly practitioner engagement. And so please let me introduce Jan Otto Johansen, Counter-Drone Unit Oslo Police, which is organized under the bomb unit at the Police National Preparedness Center, which is incidentally next to where I live. So, you know, there's this constant buzzing overhead. We can have a conversation about this later on. Håkon Hilmar Ferkingstad and Thomas Dønne from Gasco, please come up. Gasco is the operator of the integrated Norwegian gas transport system and are responsible for delivering gas from the Norwegian continental shelf to Europe, which is, economically important for us, but also is very vitally important for how Norway is seen in Europe and the role Norway is given within European security politics. Joachim Hovland, Head of Drones and Robotics, Aker Solutions. Where are you? There you are. Excellent. I know you had a busy morning. Aker Solutions has, among other things, successfully installed an autonomous drone system on Aker BP's Edvard Grieg platform in the North Sea, enabling remote inspections from shore. So I think I'll invite you just to sit down, and you're going to be getting your first 10 minutes.
Yeah, perfect.
You want to... You want to sit down? So, which means you're going to have to stand up, and I'll go and...
I'll try.
I'll sit here.
I'll do my best for the next 10 minutes.
And when I start looking threatening, it's... Yeah.
I'll do my best. So, never mind the screen. Thank you so much for having me. As said, my name is Jan Otto. I'm from the Norwegian National Police, and I've been doing drone countermeasures for the past 7 years. During this period, there has been an immense change in the threat landscape. The world has changed somewhat from a pretty peaceful place to live, but as of now, we have a war going on in Europe. And when I started back in 2018, drones were not considered a threat, at least not here in Norway and in the western part of Europe, because that was something that only took place somewhere else. This was technology that was only available for military and state actors, and the only threats we saw here back home were the senseless and reckless flying drones, typical over the National Days parade in Oslo. So, in general, there were no hostile intent. There were just the senseless and the reckless people out there. So, since 2018 and to here we are today, there has been a tremendous changes throughout everything. The drone technology has evolved. The threat picture has changed, and we see that this development, it only goes faster and faster, because there's kind of one good thing about war: it's an incubator for development. So everything that was moving quite fast before the war, it just the tempo increases. So nowadays we're not talking months and years from every time we see something new. It takes like 2 to 3 weeks, and then suddenly everything has changed again. So that's kind of the new reality. So back home, we have had several drone sightings the last few years. We have had some close to our oil and gas installations offshore. I'm sure you all remember. A few weeks back, we suddenly had several drone sightings close to our airports and our critical infrastructure. And this challenges us in so many ways, because this means that we need to reconsider how we think and how we practice drone protection, or how we protect ourselves against new threats. That being said, there are so many threats or potential threats out there. Drones are only one of them. And during my presentation, I will talk about the drones that are flying in the lower airspace. You have drones in space, you have them on water, you have them underwater. So what I need to worry about is quite limited compared to the technology that is available out there. So what we have seen is that in many cases the threat becomes real because we don't have any mechanisms or tools in order to verify whether is there an actual threat or is it something else? What are the intent behind the flying? Or is it even a drone? Because that's also something we try to emphasize when we talk to people, to be clear about what have you actually seen. Have you seen a drone? Because a drone, a fixed-wing drone, has wings. A rotary drone has propellers, legs, and a camera. A blinking light, white, red, and green, could be a drone, but it could also be something else. So we urge people to be very specific when they report these drone sightings. So please, if you have seen a blinking white light, let that be the words you're using when you call up the police, because when someone first have used the word drone, it's close to impossible to reverse it, because if drone has been said, it's a drone. And if one drone has been seen, there will be more. That doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't drones up there, because they are. There are like tens, if not hundreds of thousands of drones throughout the Norwegian skies. So the drones, they are there. And a lot of the focus in media regarding drone sightings are the visual sightings, the drones we have seen, which means the drones that someone wants us to see. If someone were to fly a drone for a recon mission over our critical infrastructure without us knowing, they just do it. They just simply turn off the light or fly high enough. So it's kind of, we need to try to put this into the correct context. But that being said, that doesn't necessarily mean that drones could pose a threat to our critical infrastructure. But it does not mean that every blinking light on the sky is one of those drones. And I could talk about this all day, but again, my main focus on this is, number one, we need to understand that the drones, they are here to stay, just like the internet. They're not going anywhere. They are getting more and more sophisticated every day. They are getting easier to fly. They are getting cheaper. You can buy a flying robot for like nothing. You don't need to know how to fly it. And those drones, they will be there. Some of them, they are most likely spying on us, but most, they are not. And there are drones we can't see. And if someone were to wish to strike us or attack us with a drone, they would just simply do it. So that's kind of, we need to try to balance the threat. And again, a blinking light or a drone is a blinking light or a drone, but we need to have kind of the broader picture in terms of what is the current threat pictures against our critical infrastructure. How are this infrastructure protected? So what if there is a drone over an oil and gas installation? So what? Is it an actual threat, or is it more of a nuisance? Is it something we can do on the ground level to make our infrastructure more safe, so even if there are drones that wants to hurt us, feel free to try, because we have protected our values so good. So even if there are drones, it shouldn't be a major concern to us. But again, in order to get a grasp on everything, I think it's crucial that we see this from my point of view, which is the end user. At the sub-tactical level, we have the industry. We have everyone having critical infrastructure. They need to do their own assessments. They need to take their own measures. We have our security services. we have our national and international partners, and we have academia, because we need all these stakeholders to take part in this. Otherwise, we will end up in a not the best place, because we all need each other in order to kind of better understand what drones are, what they can be, and what they should be, and what we really don't want them to be. Thank you.
It's wonderfully on time, and again, thank you for being with us throughout the project. You guys? I'll move over here. Do they only get 10 minutes together, huh? They don't get like 10 minutes each, do they? Oh, we're okay.
Okay. Thanks for inviting us and letting us speak and participate in this interesting topic, changing topic. First of all, we need to say something about who we are and what we operate, so that you understand why we are so interested in this topic. Gassco is the operator of the Norwegian gas export infrastructure. We have a headquarter on Bygnes outside Haugesund, and we are a non-profit state-owned company. We manage all this spaghetti that you see in the North Sea, approximately 9,000 kilometers of pipelines, large diameter pipelines. Most of it is subsea. We have also 3 processing plants onshore, one at Nyhamna, one at Kolsnes, and one at Kårstø. We operate riser platforms offshore, and we have 6 exit terminals in Europe, 2 in Germany, 1 in Belgium, 1 in France, and 2 in UK. The amount of energy going through the system is quite enormous. In 2024, it was 117 billion standard cubic meters of gas, which is the same as 1,295 terawatt hours of energy. This is about 9 times the renewable energy production in Norway. The importance of this infrastructure is, it probably says itself, but we're also subjugated to the Security Act because we are critical infrastructure. So to the drones. In 2020, we conducted a study where we looked into drones and the drones in the security way connected to our infrastructure. Back then, we concluded that we have sufficient measures connected to our infrastructure. For example, we have fly forbid zones on our offshore plants and so on. But as many has been into here, there's been a lot of change in this threat landscape and in rapid involvement since the war, advanced technology and so on. So we see that, of course, we need to stay focused on this topic, and as Jan Otto mentioned, we need to find the right level for the industry where we should be with our measures towards drones. So given the last year's developments, we need to stay focused on this and update our studies and work with this on a other way than we have used to do historically. Oh, this not.
Okay, my name is Håkon Hilmar Farkingstad. I also work in Glasgow, but I work in a different department. I work in operation technology. And in the past, I've spent a lot of my time trying to get robotic solutions and drones into our asset, to start using them, because there's a lot of advantages of using these type of tools at our assets. Now lately, I have also been changing the focus a bit to look for methods and how we can avoid or protect us against these and monitor what can happen if somebody with some bad intentions want to use these type of solutions to go into our assets and do something. It's a challenging environment to navigate in, to evaluate, and to be on top of, to understand the trends, the risk, and the relevant countermeasurements that we can do. And also, a much wiser guy than me recently said to me that counterpart, you know, the criminals or those who want some bad intentions, they can innovate with the speed of light, but us as an operator for oil and gas, and for example the police, we have to innovate according to the regulations and the rules. So, and as Jan Otto also mentioned, that technology, and a lot of others today, technology is moving real fast. Within drones and drone technology, the war in Ukraine and Russia have shown that technology is evolving quite fast. 2 or 3 weeks it takes to innovate, go from an idea to get it field proven in some cases. In the past, that took maybe 1 or 2 years to get at the same level. Also, to my understanding, there's about 15 to 20 and maybe more ways of operating these drones, controlling them. That makes it challenging. There are many good detection systems out there that work in theory, they work in the lab, they work at demonstrations, but how good do they work in a real environment? Where you have other activities ongoing, you have a lot of different noise that can interact, you have challenging weather conditions, and so on. So, and also to my understanding, every countermeasurement that is there, at least now, that can be tricked and can be fooled. So do we need hybrid systems? There are a lot of those out there as well now, in use and also market ready. But as some already have mentioned, what is the threat? What is the real threat? We need to understand the threat both in the big picture, but also on each of our assets. And to understand that, and to be also understand the technology development, which happens on the drone side and the counter measurement side, to do the right decisions. And for us, drones is just one part of the threat picture. As Thomas showed you, our system where we are the operator, we have also challenges underwater, on water, on land, and in the air. And also, I attended a dinner yesterday, and I think we need to expand that list now to also to space. So further, how many of the observations are drones? And how many of the drones that you have observed are a real threat? And what damage can those that are a threat cause on our assets? Put that together with what we already mentioned earlier when it comes to creative and innovation that happens at the speed of light. The media focus. The last 2 months, or September, October, there were at least 30 observations of drones or possible drones at critical infrastructures and airports in Europe. And this makes it difficult and challenging environment to navigate in. So what are we doing? My personal opinion, we are not doing enough, most likely. We are working with the risk evaluation, getting that in a bit more dynamic phase. And we are also building competence, collaborating and sharing, which is very important with others, testing different solutions. And also, I think that we also need to be more into academia and be more visible in this area. Yeah. And my final slide is this one. This is one of the things that we are going to do next year, together with Interpol, together with Equinor, together with US Norway. We are going to do testing close to oil and gas asset here in Norway, where we're going to have a red and blue team, which are going to help us to understand also the threat and also how these kind of counter measurements can be done in an oil and gas environment. Yep, okay.
I'm not going to touch that, I think. So it's that side. Maybe we can remove some of the glasses for that PC. Just put it on top. So many smart people in this room. Can we do something about that noise? Oh, you should get the picture, I guess. Anything wrong? Yeah, oh, it blinks, at least. So I work with technology. So this is fun. Well, first of all, I can tell you a little bit about my work. So I work as head of robotics in Aker Solutions. Aker Solutions is part of the wider Aker group, which has approximately 60,000 employees. We have offices in 35 different locations around the globe. Not Russia, since that is a hot topic today. My job is to find, map, and create solutions to hopefully achieve what we are trying to achieve, to remove everyone from the offshore assets and put them into a control room. By 2029, the first installation will be fully unmanned. 2037, it will be partially unmanned. So basically, we are removing upwards of 300 people from the installation and putting them into an IOC, so Integrated Operations Control Room, onshore. How's the technology going? Great. That's a bit bad. Is it projecting? Is there any shortcut? Okay. Try something else. So I was hoping that I could start with a small video of what we are actually doing, because we are using both flying robots or drones, and we are using ground robotics, and we are also using robotics for other stuff, subsea and also on the sea, and coupling that with IoT sensors, collecting enormous amount of data to be able to do asset integrity management. What we will also see, hopefully, in the presentation is that we are also, if we can do it, so can everybody else. We have seen a surge of drone observations around our own, or the operations, or the installations that we are operating on, but also our clients' installations. of course, we don't have the presentation. I could sing a song. Could you help me, Håkon? No, okay, so I can just address what we have been hearing now from Jan Otto and Håkon and Thomas. We see that there's a lot of observations. We have seen upwards of 3,000 observations at our locations these last 2 years. Like Jan Otto said, and also Håkon, it's very important to know, is it legal or is it illegal flying? Most of them, I would say 90% of them, are actually in the gray zone. It's civilians, especially in January and these months where after Christmas, many young kids have just gotten a drone and then they want to fly it. And they don't know better. They don't know that there's laws and regulations. They don't know about restriction zones in the air. So they penetrate these restricted areas. That said, we have only gotten to stop 10 people that were blatantly flying towards these installations. Not offshore, that's onshore. When you go offshore, that's a different ball game. A private person or civilian can't just easily fly from Stavanger, where we are situated, to offshore plant, because it's in the middle of Norway and England. So it's far away. So the drones that we can see here is, if it's not a planned flight, is something that's been deployed by someone else, not with ill intentions, but intentions of collecting data for whatever reason. That's also very important to remember. What else? 3,500 drones observation, yes. It's, I would say, also 90% DJI equipment, readily available, inexpensive, easy to operate. Everybody can do it. Even my son has flown a DJI since he was 6 years old. Of course he did with me as his father, but everybody can do it. And it's not regulated. It's regulated in the forms that there's laws and regulations. We have all been talking about laws and regulations here today, but laws and regulations are set in place for people that are following them. There are, of course, just as many not following them. So it's, but we have also seen something we call probe flying. We have developed a system that is a multi-tool system, so we use a variety of different sensors to detect these drones. That is radar equipment, is visual sensors, and it's passive sensors listening to radio communication, and there's microphone arrays. In this system, we see that while using the radars, we see that sometimes, not many, but sometimes, people are flying to probe, to triangulate where these sensors are, because they can feel the radar hitting them. That is, of course, not a civilian doing that, and that is something that we have feared a lot. I don't know why they are doing it, but they want to gather intel of the installation, both onshore and offshore. When it comes to the offshore flight, Jan Otto mentioned, they want to be seen. So the observations that we have offshore now is people actually viewing them and taking an image of it. They fly with lights on, and they fly in a manner so that they want to be seen. Why? You could ask yourself, are they doing something on this side? So all eyes on me kind of thing, and then doing something subsea on the other side? We don't know, because we don't have detectors to detect them. Onshore as well, they are flying with lights on. I believe that since this presentation isn't going as planned, that we'll just close it down early and we can go over to the questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have questions.
Good.
Okay, give poor man a hand. We did it fast. Beklager det. Sånn.
Ja, det går bra. Sånn er det med teknologi. Shit. Someone silenced me, I guess.
I have a question before you guys can do. I'm sure you guys have questions too. So thank you. We've been talking about sort of waxing and waning political interest today and whether drones are hot or not and how that has gone up and down the last decade. But I would just wanted to go around the table and you know, what sort of political initiatives would you like to see in your sector? What would be very helpful for you? And for you, you know, in your toolbox, I mean, what kind of tools would you like? Just around the table.
Should I start?
Yeah.
Okay. Good question. Where to start? For us, it's a bit challenging since we are operating in several countries to have the common understanding of the regulation and what we can do and what we cannot do. So some clarity in the regulations would be good, and also in my wish list is a regulation that is more up to date than it is now. So that is something.
Can I just ask,
when it comes
what's the problem? What's the non-up-to-date aspect? I mean,
well, technology is moving so fast, and the regulations, I believe, are very conservative on who are allowed to do different things, for example, when it comes to monitoring, counter measurements. So I think that is something that would be good to look into, and I know they are looking into it in different countries, but kind of a common understanding and answer on how to do this, because it varies also a lot from different countries.
So it's the most important thing with the work that we are doing. We are investing heavily into counter-UAS equipment for our own sake and also for our clients. And we've been doing that for many years. And the most important thing in that work is to collect evidence. And that evidence will then be fed to the right people so that they can then do whatever they need to do with it. But we definitely do need to have a plan at least, or aim for a plan where the government could go in and help invest in such systems that we are investing in, because it's very costly. And we can't just require every civilian company out there buying these systems. So that is also something that I would like to ask for. Yeah.
I mean, I think this points to something we haven't really discussed today, but this is how drone airspace relates to this concept of total defense, beredskap, totalforsvar, and sort of how, you know, who's responsible for defending what and how. I mean, as you were speaking, I sort of got imageries of you know, the Norwegian everyday man, mostly men and women, getting their like gun out of their weaponskap and starting to shoot down drones. You know, how do we sort of defend ourselves as individuals, families, companies, cities? Okay, your toolbox.
Yeah, so as you all probably know, and from what you can hear from us, it's very silo-based. So where everyone is doing their thing on their own ground. So I would like to see somewhat a more national, strategical approach to this, because there are so many good initiatives that should be able to find each other and to push forward in the right direction, because the development, it goes way too fast for us to do the same thing more than once. So I would like to see something more on the national strategical level.
I think this was probably what we expected to see at the tail end of the project, that we had a more mature national governance structures on drones, and that, you know, things were operational, not in the sense of pushing commercial boundaries, but simply making things work. And I think this seems to be, as of yet, quite immature. Thank you. I think it's now time for questions. Please raise your hand. I see you, and then you, and then you.
Thanks. Two very quick questions. One for Jan Otto. What is an example? You mentioned, you know, some technological updates happening in a 2-week time frame. I was just wondering if you could give an example of that. And then to our friends from GASCO, I just wanted to ask if there has been any modeling as to whether unmanned boats are an immediate threat to some of the offshore critical infrastructure. Thank you.
I think we can get those answered and then move along.
I'll try my best. So first of all, in terms of the development, we see that everything within the technology itself, where you see they start using new frequencies, the drones are getting more robust, they find new ways in order to get communication, to get the GPS location, and on the other side, every 2 or 3 weeks you see new ways to utilize that technology in order to circumvent the security measures already in place. Was there one more question for me, or was that?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, you were speaking about aerial drone threats to offshore critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's any modeling about threats of unmanned boats, like the boats that we've seen, for example, in Ukraine, in the Ukrainian conflict.
That, how can I answer that? We know that, yeah, we are aware that that could be a threat, and yeah, we are evaluating it and looking into it.
That was the most hedged answer I've heard today. Very good. Does this man have a security clearance? Okay, but more questions, please.
Hi, Anders Martinsen from US Norway. I think it's sort of a general one that I'd like to elaborate on all of you. So in Norway, there is about 450,000, something around that, of registered drones. Only 35,000 of them have signed up for the most likely mandatory registration. At the same time, there is a difficulty, as you're mentioning, Joachim, to actually get the investment. Jan Otto is asking for a national strategy. So the question is, are we using too much focus on the counter side when we haven't seen too many potential threats, which is not very specific, when we can also use the same technology for actually accelerating the safeguarding of the airspace when it's not used for counter?
If I could start trying to answer Anders' question, I think it's not either or. It's kind of, you need to see the safety and the security as once, because you do need to educate the drone pilots out there, but you also need to have kind of the security perspective on it, because what we have seen so far is that on the regulatory side, on the development side, it's mainly a safety focus, which means that we are talking about how the drones are becoming more robust, so they are safer to fly. But we then sometimes disregard that having these drones now becoming flying cellular phones, they will be much more difficult to mitigate if needed. And as we see the smaller drones, like sub 250 grams, in a safety perspective, that's a non-threat. But in a security perspective, that's a big threat. So it's trying to see, when you do all these regulations, also on the European stage, to see these two together and to try to find somewhat a balance between them. But again, it's also important for me to mention that there is a significant difference between the security threat and the senseless and the reckless drone flying, because for me, I'm not looking for people in breach of the drone regulations. That's kind of like going outside looking for people breaching and traffic regulations. That's not kind of our main
Although
focus.
we did think police did that, though.
He has his own people for that.
Yeah. But I just want to add that, you know, we've been following the Akunin saga in this project, and for those of you not familiar, it's the son of a Russian oligarch. He's a businessman with a British passport also, who was caught flying his drone illegally after the first sanctions came out. And that sort of traveled up and down through the Norwegian courts in the Arctic area, but also down here in Oslo in the Supreme Court. And I think, at least from a legal perspective, it revealed sort of enormous knowledge gaps in the Norwegian judiciary, but also slightly problematic impact of my colleagues' good work on law review articles, and then the amount of impact you're able to have if you sort of know your basics. So there's a general problem of lack of competence, I think, also in how we deal, because as Tamar said, there's not a lack of guardrails. I mean, we have tons of laws, but it just like, how do we navigate all of this? Can you sort of come to a usable way of letting someone experiment or someone use, or, you know, where are the thresholds? So I do think it would be good to have more people involved in this debate that are sort of more established legal actors, for example. I mean, more people just need to get interested. That was my own little hobby horse.
I think I want to elaborate a bit, because yes, we do have laws and regulations in place, put in place by EASA. But another thing is, if I go out and drive my motorbike or I drive my car without having a license and I crash into someone, I'm liable for that, right? That also is true for flying these drones, because they are under laws and regulations. You aren't allowed to do that. So there are a real possibility of you doing something that will damage yourself, as well as damaging other one's property, and that could be somewhere we could target these illegal flyers, because there are a lot of them just going and buying these drones in the store and trying to fly it. Of course, you would try to fly it. It's like an RC plane, right? It's for fun. It's yeah. So.
I guess you could also say that when we view the regulations, we very often see them as aviation, and we then assume that the people flying these drones are aviators. So instead of having geofencing, making it impossible to actually fly the drone in certain areas, we're more into that. We have remote ID. All we need to do is to make sure that the pilot is compliant, and as the pilot is an aviator, of course he will be compliant, because that's kind of the safety culture. But instead we should perhaps also consider other measures in order to help, to not to force, but to make these regulations be more user-friendly, since most drone pilots are not aviators.
But I think one thing which remains fairly unique with the drone sector is, you know, you only need one drone crashing into the bedroom of King Harald at the castle for this to be a complete disaster. You know, you keep sort of, I mean, you know, you're right that there hasn't really been a major incident, but you only need one major incident somewhere on Earth to make things a lot more difficult for everyone, and to really sort of push the conversation in directions where it's not helpful. I think we had more questions.
Just a comment, maybe from our side as well. So I'm an engineer, and I believe in data and facts. And that is also one of the challenges for us, because we aren't aware of what's the normal situation with drones in Norway. As Anders mentioned, there are 450,000 drones. But what is the normal picture? And how can we extract the unnormal situation there? Because we have also, at least for us, we are missing those data. So that's something that should probably put into intention as well. And as Joachim mentioned, 3,000 sightings in the area that they are monitoring. That's a lot.
Yes, please.
My name is Tom Smello. I'm one of those 350,000 consulants around here. Three things. First of all, sightings of drones. Most of them are actually planets. And they will, the light from the planets will refract through the atmosphere, and they will have different colors, and they will also seems like they are blinking. And if you look at the planet long enough, it will also move. Your brain will trick you to believe that it's moving. So I believe that 95% of the sightings are actually planets. So you then need a system to differentiate between a real sighting and something else. Secondly, I do not believe you can mitigate a drone attack So you actually need to build your infrastructure for safety, because you cannot provide enough security for that infrastructure. It needs to be built for safety. And if we had some years ago an attack on an oil installation in another country run by Norwegian, and that infrastructure was built for safety. Everything was spread out. If it had been built for security, it would be more collected. It would be easier to defend. And thirdly, the idea of using red team, I applaud that for an exercise, because that is really useful, getting people with knowledge, injecting incidents. The problem with red teams is to throttle them back, so the main training audience are able actually to respond before the next injection comes. Thank you.
Can I just give an answer to that first? You're touching on the pinnacle of drone detection here. You say that most drone detections are planets. I say that some of them are. and you and me will never agree, right? So this is why we need to collect evidence and identify, is it actually a drone and not a bird or whatever? Yeah. So.
I think well, we're going to let them go, and then you can comment back, maybe.
I just had I totally agree on you with the safety versus security part.
Can you give him the mic? Oh,
Okay.
You have a mic.
I have one.
Hello? Okay.
Yeah.
I totally agree on the safety versus security part, because our infrastructure is big and it's built on during peacetime. So we need to more focus on spare parts and how to get back in business if something happens. So we're not building in everything with security perspective. We're thinking safety. That's the most important thing. And then security is also that has more than one level. Also the backup thing and redundancy and so on.
And if I can follow up, one question to everyone here is, for example, where did the UFOs go? You know, in the 60s, 70s, everyone saw UFOs, and that was what you saw. And in the 80s, 90s, it was U-boats. We saw a lot of them. Actually, there's also one observation that a U-boat crashed into an oil platform in Norway. It got stuck. Luckily, it was a German one, so it was NATO, but they had some explanation to do why it got crashed into a platform. And now everyone sees drones. So where did the UFO go?
I'm going to have to say, for those who are interested, and you should go to Fane Greenwood. She has a reading list for you of sort of mythical airships in European history. This goes back centuries and centuries. We're running a little bit out of time, so quick comment. Then I saw you, and then I saw you, and then we're going to round up. You want to?
Did I have more?
No,
I was finished.
Then you're finished. Then we're going to send the questions back.
Yes, I'm Barry Lebel. I'm the defense attaché, adjunct defense attaché from the Netherlands. I have a question for maybe the police or maybe to Gasco as well, that the task of guarding critical infrastructure is also a responsibility of the Norwegian armed forces, right? So to what extent do you cooperate with the Norwegian armed forces, and do you see a role for the Norwegian armed forces in developing some of national plan?
I could try to start off from the police perspective. So luckily, Norway is quite a small country, and we have a close cooperation throughout so many different entities, everything ranging from Aker, Gasco, to different branches of the armed forces. So we do have a lot of cooperation, but this also has something to do when, where, and what, so to say. Who is the threat actor? Where are we kind on the scale between peace and war? And who has the right equipment for the task, so that it's kind of many things that you need to take into consideration. But again, Norway is a small country, and we try to be as unified as we can.
Yeah, I totally agree. We have a close cooperation with the police, and that's who we talk to. I guess the police talk to the army if there are need for anything there. But we have a close cooperation with the police and also the Secret Service parts of Norway to understand the threat picture around us together with the police.
And I think, I mean, the reason why this is also partly uncomplicated is I think for the Norwegian population still has been partly enrolled in the military. I mean, the trust level is quite high. And the population trusts sort of the armed forces. So I mean, that might change, but as of now, we remain the very high trust country. Last question, please.
Thank you. It's me again. So some would say that back in 2022, the oil and gas industry and owner of critical infrastructure, they had too much of a safety focus. They were too focused on holding both hands on the rails going down the stairs, but they did have a security focus looking what was happening above them. What has changed the last few years? You're representing parts of it here. What has changed within your sector? Since I don't see that we have the same sort of ambitions as in 2022, 2023, where there was like really drive. Everybody wanted data. Håkon were saying, I'd like to have data. It is 3 years ago. Why have we not even come further than we are now? It's only a handful of you who are here today.
Okay, I'm going to let you guys have max 30 seconds each, because that's a very large question.
I want to address one thing. We haven't lowered any safety standards in the oil and gas industry. We still want everybody to come home after the day's work. So if that includes holding the handrail while you're walking, or if it's having a hard hat on, that hasn't changed. But yeah, the observations has been observed by people with eyes. And if I send a message out in my company now saying, look up, we know that there's a drone in the sky, I will get 60 reports like that there's a drone. That's a lot of false reporting. But nothing has changed regarding safety, I would say.
For us, one of the changes is that we are now under the security law in Norway. So that makes some changes. But I totally agree with Joachim. We are still focusing very much on the safety. We want everyone to get home now. And there's a lot of concern out in our assets as well. What about drones? What kind of threat are they for us? So that is some of the things that have changed, that we are out there and visible, and also to have some measurement and how to handle if there were a drone observation or what to do. So so that's some of the changes, and unfortunately they don't happen too fast in oil and gas industry changes. That's also a safety perspective. So some things I would very much like to change more rapidly. But that's how it is in the oil and gas industry. The change takes time.
Any final words?
Final words? No, but again, the safety side is been developed over decades. So we still we need to bear in mind that this is work in progress, but it will take time to get anywhere near on the security side if we compare it directly to the safety side. So, and it's complex, and it's expensive, and it's something brand new. But I like to think that we are one day closer every day.
So thank you all for this. With any luck, we won't have any game-changing external events, so you can keep on with your work. Thank you so much for attending and coming and participating, and thank you guys. Bruno, do you want to close this thing? Yes?
Yes, okay. Okay, exactly. So this is the end of the event. We are right on time. I'm very proud about that. Thanks a lot for the ones that contributed to it. I think this was a brilliant morning. I think that I agree with Jan-Otto. I think that we are perhaps one day closer to the place where we should be. whatever that place is, and defining what and where that place is something that will have to emanate from growing conversations between all these types of actors. You know, the problems related with drones in civilian airspaces have grown in recent years. They haven't grown as much, probably, as some would have thought, but we are in a slightly different place from where we were, you know, just a couple of years ago. So the conversations will continue. And first, you know, over lunch there, and everyone is welcome to join and grab one focaccia and canelbola, etc. But the conversations will also have to continue in the months and in the years ahead, you know, being it through master's students writing their theses, academics working on their articles, practitioners doing their job every day, and hopefully more conversations like this that bring different types of profiles to the table, because we can all contribute to making the issue more informed, more knowledge-based, more nuanced, and more updated. So thanks everyone for today, and thanks the team for the journey of the last 5 years. We will continue tomorrow and on Thursday in Brussels, and then we will just be around to continue to discuss these things in the time ahead. Thank you.